X-Men will always be there ready. And of that, I am proud.
Complete X-Men Evolution lore explored. Welcome back to the world of mutants as we dive into one of the most popular animated versions of the X-Men, X-Men Evolution. It was the third longest Marvel animated series at that time, and what set this series apart was its focus on the teenage versions of the iconic mutants set in an alternate Marvel universe. While most adolescent mutants navigated their powers and relationships, some adult mutants played the role of mentors. In this video, we will take you through a complete rundown of the show and bring you the entire lore of X-Men Evolution through a fun throwback. Season 1, Strategy X. Episode 1 begins at a football match where Jean Grey is taking pictures of the game while Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, is watching from the bleachers. Scott notices Todd Talensky picking pockets and intends to catch him, but other football players also arrive to grab Todd, who is better known as Toad, for his powers. This is a wide deviation from the comic where Toad's name is Mortimer Toynbee. Considering several characters' real names are similar to their mutant names, it can be done deliberately for the children to remember. The situation rapidly spirals out of control when Scott loses his glasses and sets the arena on fire. However, Jean and Professor Charles Xavier handle the issue with telepathic power. Professor X and Storm then pick a new student, Kurt Wagner, from the train station. He introduces Kurt to Jean and Scott, but Kurt is embarrassed because of his blue, monkey-like appearance. The next day, Logan stops by a store and picks up a newspaper reporting the fire. As he drives away on his motorcycle, Sabretooth keeps a watch from a distance. In school, Principal Raven Darkholme calls Toad to her office and asks him to learn more about Scott and the X-Men. She turns into a demonic creature to threaten Toad further. In Professor X's mansion, he gives Kurt an image inducer that will make him look like a normal teenager. Later in school, Todd tries to befriend Scott, who informs the matter to the professor. Todd breaks into the mansion that night, but Professor X has already sent Storm to take his audition. Toad is stopped by Kurt, who identifies himself as Nightcrawler. Unlike the other versions, the Nightcrawler in this series is not religious. However, he first appears dressed like a monk, which is a reference to his comic character. Kurt uses teleportation power to tease Toad and eventually transports himself and Toad into the danger room. Scott and Jean enter the room to save them, but as Kurt mistakenly unplugs a machine, Storm has to intervene. Toad refuses to join the X-Men and leaves hurriedly, but he comes face to face with Logan. Charles Xavier welcomes Logan back, while Scott shows Kurt the X-Jet or Blackbird and convinces him to stay. As a pilot episode, the story might be too simple for the plot, but it successfully highlights where each main character stands. This episode features all the main X-Men characters from the original X-Men movie. In the school, Darkholme gives an earful to Toad for leaving the mansion, and after he leaves the room, she turns into Mystique. Magneto appears behind the room, telling her it's only the beginning. Although Magneto's face is not clear in this scene, the falling bicycles and movement of metal make it one of the grandest entrances for one of the most powerful mutants. The X-Impulse. The second episode focuses on Kitty Pryde as she falls through the floor of her bedroom into the basement. Professor X picks up her information from the Cerebro and takes Jean to Kitty's house the next day. The same day, Wolverine picks up Sabretooth's smell and follows it on his motorcycle. A very humanizing factor in this is how Logan is given two motorcycles, a red one for his street look and a blue one for him dressed as Wolverine. Intrigued, Scott and Kurt follow Wolverine in a convertible. In Northbrook, Kitty sneaks from her home despite her father's restrictions. In her school, two girls trap Kitty inside the locker. Kitty's parents also refuse to speak with Xavier and Jean. At one moment, Professor X talks about obstructions, and looking at staircases, he jokes that some are even harder. No wonder he is always flanked by one member or the other. But what this series perhaps lacks is some intro on Xavier and Magneto's character. When Lance Alvers shows up vandalizing the lockers, Kitty phases through the lockers. Lance's character is missing in the comic and is created by combining Richter and Domenico Petrakis, who share the same mutant name, Avalanche. Lance tries to convince Kitty to join him by showing her his powers, but Kitty refuses to join him, and Lance uses his tremors to trip one of the girls who bullied Kitty earlier. Frustrated, Kitty escapes into the theater room where Jean tries to talk to her and shows her powers. On the other side, Wolverine faces Sabretooth, and the brawl destroys several cars, including Scott's sleek convertible. Cyclops and Nightcrawler join Wolverine, but Sabretooth escapes through the elevator. Finally, some action could be seen in this part, but be prepared for a better showdown that can be expected later. However, the story about Kitty and Lance could have been developed better. There is undoubtedly a subtle romantic tension between the duo, but with the focus on new recruitments, that story is yet to be developed. Kitty is freaked out, but she later meets up with Lance, who convinces her to enter the school's office. Kitty tries to leave when he steals the midterm papers. At the same time, Jean and Kitty's parents appear at the office. Lance brings down the building on them, and Jean uses her powers to keep the stones from killing them. Kitty also escapes from the falling rocks and rubble. She brings out her parents and Jean from the ruined building. Kitty's father finally agrees to let Kitty join the X-Men. This cartoon has bumped Shadowcat or Kitty Pryde into one of the main characters, so it has definitely been a booster for Kitty Pryde in the X-Men movie universe and the comics. Similarly, Mystique recruits Lance and names him Avalanche, adding one more member to her group of mischief makers. If you think the narrative is simple enough so far, do not be disheartened, because later on in the show you will see Magneto's death and him being turned into one of the Horsemen of Apocalypse, and we will tell you all about that if you stay tuned. Rogue Recruit. In this episode, we find the X-Men trying to recruit Rogue. During a school dance, Rogue accidentally knocks out a football player and gets his strength and memories, which alerts Cerebro. Charles Xavier rallies the whole team to handle the situation and recruit Rogue. Rogue's guardian, Irene Adler, is a blind woman who can see the future. She calls somebody to get Rogue, as she has also seen Xavier coming with his team. It turns out Irene has called Mystique, who had previously appointed Irene to take care of Rogue. Rogue arrives at the football player's house and appears confused by the new memories and her strength. Meanwhile, Nightcrawler's antics have frustrated Kitty, who is now called Shadowcat. Mystique morphs into Wolverine and then Storm to threaten and chase Rogue, who gets scared and confused. Wolverine's attire in the first season is closer to his comic counterpart, while Mystique's design was influenced by the first X-Men movie and fashioned in a manner that would be kid-friendly. The creators were, however, not satisfied with the design for Mystique in the first season, and a more realistic version was used from season 2 onwards. Kurt changes his appearance to try to talk to Rogue, but Kitty's sneak attack shocks Rogue, who touches Kurt accidentally. Rogue freaks out after she gets Nightcrawler's powers and teleports to a cemetery. As Nightcrawler passes out, Kitty feels guilty and tries to connect to Xavier telepathically. This may again hint at another unique relationship, as throughout season 1, Kurt continues to tease and annoy Kitty while they share a deep, caring friendship. Charles Xavier hears Kitty and sends the rest of his team to control Rogue. Jean is able to talk it out with Rogue, but Rogue gets scared as she sees Storm approaching. Rogue hides inside a building, but Mystique shapeshifts into Cyclops and Jean so that Rogue is utterly distrustful of the X-Men. As she tries to run away, Rogue shoves Storm and gets her power, while Storm gets unconscious. Rogue is unable to control Storm's powers and causes rain and thunder. Rogue becomes overwhelmed by all of the powers and teleports. The X-Men leave after Storm and Kurt gain consciousness. In what you may consider a comic moment, Kitty calls Kurt the Fuzzy Elf, while Scott looks surprised and mouths the word silently. Kurt is often called the elf by his teammates, but if you ask me, he resembles more of a monkey, especially with his talent for hanging from anywhere. This episode is a fusion of great storytelling and action that hooks the viewers. The episode ends with Principal Darkholme welcoming Rogue into Bayville School. She has wiped Rogue's memories from her previous encounter with the X-Men. It's a wonder how Mystique even has that power. Magneto applauds Mystique for adding a valuable member to their brotherhood. The group's name is derived from its comic counterpart. However, this version is a highly reimagined one. It is later revealed that Rogue kept the communicator that Jean had previously given her, indicating that she might retain some memories of the encounter. Mutant Crush. The plot covering recruitment of mutants continues in this episode as Principal Darkholme recruits a large mutant boy named Fred Dukes, who calls himself Blob. Fred is a sideshow entertainer with a temper issue, which manifests when people laugh at him. In Bayville High, Jean tries to befriend Blob. However, he gets triggered when he sees Scott and Kurt laughing. Although it's not directly hinted at, much of Blob's reaction to laughter might be a result of underlying mental health problems like body image issues, where he might feel that people make fun of his large appearance. However, this does not seem to affect him in other episodes. A food fight ensues when Fred throws food at the jocks, but Jean calms him down and shows him her powers. Fred becomes jealous of Jean and Scott's friendship. Even if they are not official, Jean has kept a picture of hers with Scott. On the other hand, Scott and Rogue are asked to practice Shakespeare's Henry V, bringing them closer, and there you have the ingredients of romantic tropes for later. Now, it might be too much of a romantic lineup in high school drama for a superhero show. However, given that the show was mainly meant for kids and enormously popularized the X-Men characters, I would say such emphasis is fair enough. Moreover, the X-Men movies have not shied away from investing in some romance. In fact, it has been the one central plot in every timeline. Coming back to X-Men Evolution, the next day, Blob forces Jean to go out with him, but she declines and uses her telekinetic powers to throw bricks at him. The iron structures holding the bricks fall on Jean, making her unconscious. Jean wakes up to find herself tied to a chair as Fred prepares a dinner date with her in an abandoned workshop. Jean uses her telepathy to call Professor X for help, who sends Wolverine and Kurt to gather everyone and find Jean. When Kurt interrupts Scott and Rogue's practice for the play, Rogue comments that Kurt is like an annoying brother, foreshadowing their relationship in the series. Wolverine breaks through the warehouse door and fights with Blob but gets pinned down on the ground. Scott and Kurt also join them, but Blob knocks them out. Rogue arrives at the scene and touches Scott to obtain his powers. She finally takes down Blob, shooting him down to a dump yard, making the X-Men grateful to her. The writing on these few episodes is slow and focuses mainly on the X-Men and Mystique recruiting new members. These episodes gears up the audience for a future Brotherhood versus X-Men combat.
Pietro? Call me Quicksilver.
Speed and Spyke. Of all the things that X-Men Evolution may have done right, the use of peppy music can be considered one of the best attributes of this animated series. It also complements every situation or action scene, like the basketball sequence at the start of Episode 5. Evan Daniels wins a basketball match for his school, making his teammate Pietro Maximoff jealous. However, he finds spikes protruding from his body during the game. He is later confronted by his aunt Aurora Monroe, aka Storm. Storm pleads with him to join Xavier's school and brings in Scott and Jean to convince Evan. Evan refuses them and returns to school to catch a thief, who turns out to be Pietro. Pietro has the power of speed and calls himself Quicksilver. Pietro frames Evan for the theft of school lockers, and the police arrest him. Storm and the other arrive at the police station to make a deal with Evan, asking him to join Xavier in exchange for getting released from jail. Evan agrees and takes the name Spyke, but he waits to exact revenge on Quicksilver. The introduction of Spike's character can be crowned as one of the brilliant examples of how cartoons add to the characters and plots of a particular comic. Yet Spike's character doesn't appear in any comics, and unlike X-23, he was never added to the comics later. Also, Spike's character was supposed to be tragic, as he would be affected by his appearance. Nonetheless, this line was discarded in the first season to make the character more relatable. On the other hand, Quicksilver is a very popular character who has appeared in Avenger comics and even movies as Magneto's son and a member of the Brotherhood. Mystique's recruits could be seen lounging outside the principal's room while Magneto asks Raven Darkholme to recruit Pietro. Magneto shares that he has a particular interest in Quicksilver. Raven arranges a basketball match between Bayville and Spike's previous school, but before the match, Spike faces off with Pietro. Scott and Jean also accompany Spike and teach him the importance of teamwork. Together, they capture Quicksilver and frame him for vandalization. Spike also appears smart enough as he has somehow recorded Pietro confessing his crimes of stealing from the lockers. Magneto visits Pietro in jail and offers to help him escape if he joins Mystique's group. An interesting difference could be seen on how both Professor X and Magneto helps mutants get out of jail. While Professor X uses his telepathy and manipulation or maybe even authority, Magneto is simple about bending metal and helping Pietro escape. Coming back to the use of great music, the last scene of this episode uses the original theme from the 90s X-Men cartoon series. This scene shows the X-Men enjoying themselves by the pool as Charles feels blissful with the addition of Evan, the youngest member.
Fork it over, losers, or this place is gonna rock.
Middleverse. The pace of the episodes finally picks up with this segment. Kurt gets upset with Scott for being too stuck up, while Scott is frustrated about Kurt's constant jokes and goofiness. Well, who can blame Kurt for keeping the tone light? Interestingly, the scene of the argument also shows Spike stealing his friend's milk cartons, which is used to show that Spike needs to consume a lot of food and milk due to his power of growing bony projections. An upset Kurt ends up in the school basement, where he finds a hidden lab. Kurt passes through a trap that switches on the computers. An unknown guy with a Native American look appears on the screen and informs that the lab will self-destruct. The explosion damages Kurt's image inducer. Rogue follows Kurt into the lab and finds a funny-looking machine. As they fight over the machine, it switches on and sucks Kurt into a pocket dimension. Kurt watches all the students pass him by in this dimension, but he cannot speak to or touch them. Some students catch a glimpse of Kurt and misjudge him as a ghost or demon. Rogue discards the device in a dumpster and Todd picks it up. He uses the device to send several objects into another dimension, including Raven's car and later her furniture. The character of Toad is not only made slimy and disgusting, but is also the school's idiot, adding a bit of comic relief to the Brotherhood. Jean and Scott confront Mystique's Brotherhood about Kurt and are on the brink of a fight. Principal Darkholme stops the battle and berates Jean and Scott. Being her partial self, Principal Darkholme calls Jean and Scott to her office only to find her furniture missing. This is also when Jean and Scott notice Todd running away with the device. Meanwhile, Kurt meets Forge, the guy who appeared on the computer. Forge is a mutant who understands and forges technological devices. He made the teleportation device and got stuck in the pocket dimension 20 years back. Unlike the comics, Forge's mutant power enables him to change any of his body parts into technological tools and then change them back. Forge makes a battery that will help Kurt to teleport to the outer dimension momentarily. When Cyclops and his mates decide to blow off the device, Kurt uses the battery to teleport and warns them to reset the device, but his sentence is cut mid-off. Spyke encourages Cyclops to destroy the device, much to Kitty and Jean's chagrin, who are tired of this boyish affair of blowing things up. However, Cyclops understands Nightcrawler's message and resets the device, opening a portal. Just then, the Brotherhood arrives to stop them. The X-Men learn about Rogue working for Mystique, but she refuses to join the fight. Forge and Nightcrawler escape just before the device gets destroyed. The creators of this episode wanted Forge and Kurt to use the Live Long and Prosper Star Trek reference, but Kids WB did not want to mention the franchise. Such little moments may have made a better impact, but making the show more kid-friendly and restrictive did have some unwarranted effect on the series' popularity among older audiences. Keeping the bromance intact, Scott and Kurt resolve their misunderstanding. The episode ends with some friendly banters and the young X-Men driving together to Duncan Matthews' party.
Don't mess with the Rogue!
Turn of the Rogue. At the beginning, we see a training session in the Danger Room goes wrong when Scott and Kurt get attacked by a simulation of Rogue. Raven overhears Scott and Jean discussing the issue and uses it to manipulate Rogue against the X-Men. Principal Raven Darkholme orchestrates a plan for Rogue to replace Jean for the geology trip. Before they get on the bus, the teacher asks the students to submit their game toy, which is a parody of the Game Boy that was popular at that time. While the school bus is on the way, a blizzard obstructs their path, and Rogue suggests taking their snowmobiles to reach the cave. Rogue races Scott and almost throws him over the cliff. As a viewer, I would question Rogue's morals in this episode, as Scott was not riding alone but also carrying another innocent classmate whose death would have been on Rogue's hand. Once inside the cave, they confront each other and discuss the same. But just as Scott is about to explain the misunderstandings, Mystique appears as Paul and then shapeshifts to Principal Darkholme, revealing her identity to an X-Man for the first time. Rogue gets startled when Mystique pushes Scott off the cliff. She holds Mystique's hand to read her memories and learns all the truth about Mystique's manipulation. In the mansion, Charles is visited by Magneto, who warns him of the implications of hiding the truth from the X-Men. From the first episode, Magneto maintains the image of a supreme being, where he is just floating around and rattling windows. In all these episodes, only his silhouette and mask could be seen, further adding to the theatrics. When Jean returns to the mansion, Charles Xavier and Logan realize something is amiss. They take up the X-Jet to find Scott. In the meantime, Rogue has jumped off the cliff to help Scott, and the two somehow manage to get on a stone bridge on the mountain. This episode continues with the recruitment plotline and centers on the same topics, which may be bland to many viewers. As the blizzard makes it hard for the X-Jet to locate them, Rogue asks Scott to use his optical energy blast as a beacon. Mystique shapeshifts into a wolf to attack them, but Rogue uses Scott's power to throw her back. But the shapeshifter transforms into a mighty bird to escape being caught. The X-Jet rescues them, and Rogue agrees to join the X-Men, leaving the Brotherhood, which now only constitutes boys. Later, the teenagers complain to Charles for hiding the truth about Principal Darkholme. However, as Rogue points out the importance of trust, the team agrees to be more honest with each other in the future.
Agreed. Big mistake. Yeah?
Spyke Cam. The story begins with Sabretooth spying on Wolverine and looking for an opportunity to take him down. When Evan gets a poor grade in current affairs, he is asked by the teacher to record a film about his life in Bayville. However, you can hardly blame Evan for writing about the Star Wars movie franchise when the teachers asked them to write about the Star Wars program. Turns out the teacher wanted an essay on the very real Strategic Defense Initiative. Spyke uses the camera to shoot various people and places, including Logan, who is entering Xavier's Institute. On another front, Kitty and Rogue contend to join the school's production of Dracula. However, Kitty joins especially over a fascination of a good-looking guy who is playing the titular character. Sabretooth follows Spyke and trips him to get the camera. He sees the video footage to locate Logan, but leaves the camera behind after recording a video message. On the other hand, Evan has been a nuisance to all the members. From secretly filming Jean in the bathroom to interrupting training sessions, he has managed to irk everyone with his camera. Wolverine and Scott had been training on the Institute's grounds, with Spyke filming them when Sabretooth breaks in to fight Wolverine. The fight is interrupted by Storm, who orders Wolverine to take their personal fights outside the premises. When Logan and Charles discuss that Sabretooth might take any of the kids hostage, Spyke overhears them. He pursues Kitty and Rogue to follow him into the woods, where he films the girls dancing. This scene is explicitly copied from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which has been a constant inspiration for Shadowcat. The particular dancing sequence is a tribute to the Buffy and Faith dance. The other reason is that the animators were low on budget, and copying the scene was a more cost-effective idea. It's clear that despite all her intelligent remarks, Rogue lacks dancing skills, and Spyke urges her to borrow some of Kitty's skills, and the girls touch their fingertips to share the power. This was a ruse by Spyke to lure Sabretooth, and as the beastly man attempts to capture them, Logan arrives at their rescue. Rogue defeats Sabretooth, and Charles drops him unconscious in a cold desert. But don't worry, Charles has wiped his memories, so my best bet is that he won't return to the Institute soon. As Kitty and Rogue perform in the school play, Evan completes his assignment by creating a film on the X-Men family sans any footage of them using mutant powers. The story in this episode is good in developing the equations between the X-Men members, but barely reveals anything about Wolverine and Sabretooth's animosity.
You can't stop the Juggernaut. Forgive me for trying, bum!
Survival of the Fittest. The opening scene features Mystique taking on the appearance of a police officer. She enters a high-security facility to meet a man encased in biofluid who is actually Charles Xavier's brother, Kane Marco. Mystique helps Marco wear the helmet, which is a mental blocker, saving him from Charles' telepathic power. She lets Marco escape and calls him Juggernaut, but he throws Mystique aside. Meanwhile, the students of Bayville High are at a survival camp, where Scott and Lance face off against each other in competition. As both take advantage of their powers, a verbal argument ensues between the Brotherhood and the X-Men. Their instructor forces the two groups to climb a hill and take a picture with the flag as a part of the competition. Jean encourages everyone to refrain from using their powers. However, this proves difficult for both teams. Jean's attire for the camp is somewhat inspired by the 90s Lara Croft the Tomb Raider. It is also one of the few episodes where Jean is the stuck-up teenager and Scott is the hot-headed high school leader. But what's amazing is to watch Lance being a better leader than Scott. He keeps his teammates in check except for Todd. The capture the flag game becomes increasingly demanding, and the Brotherhood gets trapped in the rubble, but the X-Men arrive and help them out. In the city, Juggernaut is making his way to Xavier's mansion, and Storm creates a fog so that the police cannot see him. Upon entering the Institute, Juggernaut thrashes through the doors and damages Cerebro's helmet, which drives Mystique mad. It serves her right to be exceptionally foolish to let out Juggernaut. Juggernaut is unwilling to work with Mystique and attacks her, cornering her with Xavier. The students get the news and rally together to save their respective mentors. The Brotherhood and X-Men take a picture with the flag and give it to their camp instructor before leaving on the X-Jet with Storm. Charles has previously informed Logan that Marco is his half-brother whose X-gene got activated by mysticism, whereas in the comics, Marco is his stepbrother who got his powers from the Crimson Gem of Sidorak. Wolverine tries to stop Juggernaut but gets thrashed, as does the Danger Room obstructions. This episode shows the first ever team-up between the Brotherhood and the X-Men. Honestly, it's been much enjoyable than watching the two teams constantly trying to beat each other. The part where each of the students work together to open Juggernaut's helmet remains one of the best moments to remember. The students arrive just in time to stop Juggernaut. They manage to remove Juggernaut's helmet and Charles stops him with his powers. Mystique leaves with the Brotherhood, quite impressed with the teamwork, while Lance agrees that Scott might be a good leader. Later, Charles sends Juggernaut back to the Stokes County Maximum Security Facility to be contained like earlier. It is interesting to note that towards the end of the series, Xavier is presumed dead, but ends up turning into one of the Horsemen of Apocalypse just like Magneto. Do stay with us till the end of the video to find out more on this.
You already know me, son. No! No, it's impossible!
Shadowed Past. This time the episode opens with Rogue having a nightmare where she sees a woman fleeing with a tiny baby while a pack of wolves chases her. The woman is also running away from a man who seems like an evil sorcerer, but his appearance makes it clear that the person is Magneto. In the nightmare, the baby falls from the woman's arm and into the river, which makes Rogue shriek and wake up. The whole dream sequence feels like a medieval scenario, which does not match up to the story's current events, which are in modern era. The others come down to check up on Rogue, and she comments that somehow she is sure that the baby from her dreams is Kurt. Professor X calls Jean, Rogue, and Kurt to discuss the matter. He reads Rogue's memory of the nightmare and realizes that the dream is a fragment of Mystique's memories obtained by Rogue when she touched Mystique during the geology field trip. Professor X also realizes that the baby is Rogue's son. Well, that explains Nightcrawler's blue body color. He also sees that Mystique blamed Magneto for doing something to the baby. This differs from the comics, where Magneto had nothing to do with Nightcrawler. However, this cartoon maintains the German accent for the Nightcrawler, which he has picked up from his adoptive parents. A scene in episode 3 where Rogue touches Nightcrawler also shows her speaking German. Professor X visits Mystique in school and informs her about the issue. Mystique morphs into a student to check up on Kurt and Rogue. It was pretty shocking when, before teleporting from school, Kurt turned off the image inducer. Although it appears no one saw him, I am sure that this was not a gross error but some deliberate action. Mystique sends Quicksilver to deliver a note to Kurt asking him to meet at sundown. However, Pietro is a double agent who informs Magneto about these developments. All this while, Charles has sent Logan to the place from Rogue's nightmare. Logan finds an old castle in the place, which is actually Magneto's secret lair. The castle might make viewers wonder why Magneto lives in what seems like Dracula's castle or, as Logan quips, Dr. Frankenstein's lair. Logan has to overcome several obstacles, and before he can find any damning evidence, the castle blows up. Scott and Jean find Mystique's note in Kurt's drawer and head out searching for Nightcrawler. When Mystique and Nightcrawler meet, Pietro appears with the rest of the group to stop Mystique from revealing the truth. The X-Men also arrive to help Kurt from the Brotherhood, while Mystique escapes by transforming into a bird. Although Kurt has learned that Mystique is his mother, he and Rogue find it hard to believe. Charles also waits for the right time to reveal the origin of the Nightcrawler. He laments that Magneto's poor choice of experimenting with mutant DNA can only have adverse effects later.
Mr. Logan, it's me! What's the matter with you?
Grim reminder. The story begins with Logan waking up from a nightmare and seeing himself escaping from a stasis tube. The dream sequence has an uncanny resemblance to the Wolverine movies that have graced the screen so far. The next day, Kitty Pryde struggles to find some privacy and moments of peace while living with so many different people. She tries to write an email to her parents describing each member and her experience, but gets interrupted every time. Logan catches the news about an accident in the Canadian wilderness near Mount McKenna during breakfast. As the place is from Logan's dream, he asks Professor X to read his dreams, who informs him that Logan's visions are suppressed memories. Logan decides to visit the area to find the source of his origin and takes the X-Jet. Those who have seen the X-Men movie from 2000 can notice that Wolverine's hair, Sabretooth's whole appearance, and Xavier's chair design are similar to those in the film. Kitty and Kurt were already in the jet, as Kitty found it an excellent private spot to write a mail, while Kurt followed just to annoy her. They sneaks up on Logan, but as Logan approaches the mountains, he experiences excruciating headaches and is almost about to hurt Kurt and Kitty. He distances himself from Kitty and Kurt to keep them safe. As it turns out, Logan's mind has been controlled by a doctor who headed the Weapon X program. Weapon X Project has previously turned Logan's claws into adamantium steel. The doctor is joined by Sabretooth, who approaches Logan, and a fight ensues. Despite all these developments, I am still unsure why Sabretooth is hell-bent on making Wolverine eat dust. Sabretooth takes Logan into the lab, and the doctor reactivates a chip in Logan's head, turning him ferocious and under the doctor's control. Wolverine and Sabretooth attack Shadowcat and Nightcrawler. For a moment, Wolverine thinks Kitty has fallen off a cliff and he becomes overcome with grief. Kitty takes the opportunity to calm him down and help him overcome the chip's influence. She hugs Logan as he breaks down, delivering one of this season's greatest emotional moments. Logan and Kitty's relationship in this episode is a replica of the relationship between Logan and Rogue in the X-Men movies. There is a faint father-daughterish bonding, and we see a much softer side of the Wolverine for the first time. Together, they catch up to the Doctor and destroy the lab, but Wolverine's suit is ruined. Kurt escapes with Kitty just before Logan concludes that Project Weapon X is officially over. Later, Logan wakes up in the mansion to find that the chip has been surgically removed by Professor X. Kitty finally finds comfort and peace, even in the chaotic surroundings of her X-Men family. Moreover, now Kurt is on her side to help her get the necessary privacy to draft a letter. The Cauldron, Part 1 and 2. The Season 1 finale were released as a two-part story. It's finally summer and Jean finds Todd in their garden. Todd starts a fight, saying it's a competition, but Jean throws him into a well. A spherical orb appears out of the blue and leaves after capturing Jean. Meanwhile, in Hawaii, a boy named Alex lies on his surfboard in the ocean. A shark attacks him, but he gets rid of it by throwing a blast of energy from his palms. Cerebro reads the boy as Alex Masters, but Xavier identifies him as Alex Summers, Scott's long-lost younger brother. Juggernaut previously destroyed the Cerebro, and this new Cerebro resembles what is seen in the movies. But before the X-Men could arrive, Magneto approached Alex and took him under his wing. Back in Bayville, Xavier, Logan, and Scott leave in the X-Jet to find Alex. I have noticed Scott has a habit of leaving his bag, only to be carried by others like Jean and Professor X. A quality that exhibits his distracted and childish behavior and how he is cared for by the others. The other students of the Institute watch them leave and plan to go out into the ocean. I am glad that Nightcrawler has finally got access to the X-Tank or the Hummer, as he was quite taken by the car's appearance in the second episode. However, Mystique sends the Brotherhood upon them. In Hawaii, Cyclops finds his brother, who takes him to Magneto. Magneto controls the X-Jet with Xavier trapped inside. Logan also jumps onto the jet, but Magneto uses his power of controlling metals to twist Logan's adamantium claws and throw him into the sea. As Logan gets on an island, he is attacked by Sabretooth. Mystique sneaks up on Storm as a cat in the mansion, but she catches on quickly and a fight ensues. Magneto takes the jet to a base in space on Asteroid M. Magneto explains that he is conducting a trial by fire to select only the worthy mutants and provide them sanctuary on the asteroid. The Brotherhood gets the better of Kitty, Evan, and Kurt, while Rogue defeats Toad. Similarly, Storm wins the fight against Mystique. The orb appears in each place and takes the winners. This season's unique turn of events is highly appreciated by viewers who find it binge-worthy. This two-part story also does an excellent job of keeping the viewers busy. At Asteroid M, Charles is shocked to find Jean, Storm, and Rogue unconscious in a tube. He is further astounded when Scott and Alex walk in willingly, wearing matching outfits. Charles tries to warn Scott of Magneto's plan telepathically, but Magneto moves Xavier into one of the tubes. However, Charles also alerts Wolverine and asks him to lose the battle with Sabretooth. Wolverine gets the clue and deliberately loses. He watches the orb leaving with Sabretooth. Meanwhile, Toad is upset about not being chosen and is forced by the rest of the X-Men to spill about the whole issue. They return to the mansion, where Mystique is also fuming for not being chosen by Magneto. Wolverine also returns to the mansion, and they all leave on the new XM Velocity jet to find Magneto. There are also some angsty affairs, as Nightcrawler sardonically calls Mystique Mom, while Logan and Mystique argue about who will lead their newly formed team. It's quite humorous to watch Logan berating a woman taller than him. At his lair, Magneto opens his helmet for the first time, revealing his white hair and face. He informs Scott and Alex about the genetic enhancer machine he has built with the Gem of Sidorak. This stone gives Juggernaut his powers in the comics, but since Juggernaut is considered a mutant in the series, the rock is used as a power amplifier. Magneto orders Sabretooth to get into the machine. Sabretooth comes out of the machine looking more like a humongous beast. Scott and Alex are also almost forced into the machine, and they emerge as much older men but in better control of their enhanced powers. Scott now does not need his glasses and can shoot energy from his eyes at will. However, he is now under Magneto's control. Alex also gets the title of Havoc. This episode provides a flashback of how the Summers got separated during a plane crash. However, in the comics, They were in the same orphanage and were later separated by Mr. Sinister. The XM Velocity, made with non-metal materials, crashes onto the base, leading to conflict between Magneto's team and the remaining mutants. Mystique gets into the genetic enhancer during the combat, and Magneto follows her while Spike and Rogue defeat Quicksilver. Storm defeats Sabretooth while Toad convinces Avalanche and Blob to join the winning side. All of them head for the jet. Jean and Xavier argue with the Summers brothers as they are still convinced by Magneto's word. On the other hand, Mystique comes out of the enhancer looking much like her movie counterparts. Storm's tremors lead to Asteroid M falling apart, and it appears Mystique and Magneto have escaped in 2 orbs. The asteroid almost falls upon the jet, but the Summers saves them by blasting off the asteroid, resulting in an energy blast that returns Scott and Alex to normal. Such premises leave significant scope for more robust story development for the upcoming seasons. This season ends with Xavier offering to help Alex.
Kitty!
Season 2, Growing Pains. The first episode of Season 2 opens on a soccer match, with Jean Grey as the MVP. A love triangle can be seen brewing with Jean going out with Duncan, disappointing Scott. While returning to the mansion, Scott, Kitty, and Kurt witness a road rash incident involving a wild driver. Scott stops the car with his energy blast while Kurt teleports to apprehend the driver. Although the mutants are hidden, the incident is all over the news, and Charles is worried about the exposure of Scott's power. A moment of discussion between Charles and Logan provides a brief montage of the new recruits in the institution. Logan mentions needing new mentors and even a few tanks. Now this is something we can only expect from Logan. Later, Scott and Charles discuss the point of hiding their identities, with Scott finding it unreasonable to hide back. Also, an update on Alex. He is still in Hawaii, surfing, but has a better grasp on his powers. The next day in school, Jean again blows off Scott for Duncan, while Rogue befriends a new girl, Risty Wild, with a similar gothic style. Lance is clearly smitten by Kitty and uses his power to cause tremors that make Kitty laugh. He goes overboard and almost drops the scoreboard on the new principal, Edward Kelly. We are yet to learn why Mystique has left her spot. Lance grabs Kitty by the wrist outside the school and Scott intervenes. The ensuing argument gives Lance the idea of revealing their mutant identities. As planned, the Brotherhood crashes the football game at night and reveals the secret identity of every mutant in Bayville High. They cause destruction and mayhem, but just as the mascot is about to drop on Kitty, Lance rescues her and gets hurt instead. However, this moment was initially censored during the broadcast due to the sensitivity of the 9/11 attacks. So, instead of Lance being struck by the rubble, the scene shows Lance holding Kitty's hand. Although I dig this Romeo-Juliet romance, I am most intrigued about who will control these bad boys now that Mystique is out of the picture. Meanwhile, Rogue knocks out Blob while Jean and Nightcrawler hold off Quicksilver and Toad, respectively. Since the mutants are all out in the open, Principal Kelly freaks out and attempts to call the police, but Jean breaks his phone. Charles decides to wipe everyone's memories and ignores Storm's concern. However, his mind hits a roadblock when he attempts to erase the principal's memory, and he passes out, leaving his work unfinished. Later, the team informs that the public thinks fireworks damaged the building, while some magnetic interference blocked the broadcast. The X-Men realize that Magneto is alive. The episode closes with Principal Kelly staring out of his window.
Wanna go faster?
Yeah, how?
Bada bing, bada boom. We are now formally introduced to the character of Tabitha Smith, codenamed Boom Boom. It's training time for the X-Men, and Boom Boom is tasked to rescue Nightcrawler from a cliff. They fool around, almost hurting Kurt, but Wolverine and Scott save him. The duo gets a punishment from Charles and is grounded. Tabitha calls Wolverine Badger, which adds to the list of things she could have done wrong. In school, Boom Boom blasts open lockers, and while her character for the series is drawn by combining images of Gwen Stefani and P-Ink, her carefree behavior appeals to Kurt. On the other hand, Jean is still with Duncan for reasons beyond my comprehension, or maybe the creators just wanted a high school trope for Jean and Scott's romance. On a more serious and practical front, the Brotherhood is in dire condition now that Mystique is out of the picture. Lance looks lucratively at the spurt-out coins when Tabby blasts off a soda machine. Tabby's father visits the school, and while inquiring about his daughter, Mr. Smith finds out where the school intends to keep the money from the school's fundraiser carnival. Mr. Smith's intentions are pretty clear there when he wants to reconcile with his estranged daughter. He even tries to manipulate her by saying that he wants to get back with Tabby's mother. When Tabby blows off her father at school, he goes to Xavier's Institute, but Charles notes that Tabby's mother has alerted them about Mr. Smith. Tabby still agrees to speak with her father, who successfully pursues her to steal for him. Later, Tabby coerces Kurt to accompany her to the carnival, and they get on a ride. Another example of her totally reckless behavior is shown when she destroys a ride controller. Kurt and Tabby continue pulling pranks on other students, and Lance notices them. At the same time, Jean's friend Taryn Fujioka joins Scott on the Ferris wheel, and this time Jean notices them and is surprised. Scott also notices Kurt and Tabby teleporting together. Tabby takes a break from Kurt and accompanies her father to break into the school. Lance and the Brotherhood have been following them and find it an opportunity to get some cash to solve their accommodation problems. Tabitha's dad forces her to blast open the school safe, but just as Tabitha and her father are about to escape with the bag of money, they are caught by the Brotherhood. They are further intercepted by Cyclops, Jean, and Spyke, who were alerted by Nightcrawler. Shadowcat is a no-show in this episode, which is perhaps why it's easier for Lance to be his notorious self. Mr. Smith gets stuck while escaping with the bag, and while his daughter tries to save him, he chooses the money over his daughter. However, they are soon captured by the police, and although Charles bails out Tabitha, she leaves the X-Men. Surprisingly, she joins the Brotherhood looking for accommodation and blasts open Mystique's former room, which Toad had been trying to break into forever. Back at the Institute, Kurt's punishments have doubled over, but he is more upset because he feels Tabitha won't come back. Power Surge. Finally, we have a Jean-focused episode, and it begins with Jean winning the MVP award. No surprise there. Everyone cheers for her except for Rogue, who is jealous of her, but Jean falters when she involuntarily hears everyone's thoughts and falls back on the deck of awards. The trophy falls from her hand, and ironically, the head of the statue atop the trophy falls off. Jean recovers quickly and is smart enough to make a pun out of that. Later, Lance accompanies Kitty to the chemistry lab, and sure, there is some fantastic chemistry going on. The class is taken by Professor McCoy, the new science and physical education teacher, who asks the students to make a stink bomb. This is the first appearance of Hank McCoy, more popularly known as the Beast, though the series still keeps a lid on that. He has somehow controlled his mutation, given that he looks normal. Later that night, Scott prepares to go to Duncan's party. It appears poor Scott is having a rough night. He gets constantly bumped, knocked, or thrown by fellow mutants. At the party, Scott and Duncan play a competitive game of ping pong, further annoying Jean. Rogue also bails from the scene, getting frustrated, and Risty guesses that she must have a crush on Scott. Jean stops a ball mid-air and pulls Duncan aside, quite oblivious that she used her powers publicly. Thankfully, no one notices it, although there were some gaping mouth. Amidst their argument, Jean starts losing control and shoves Duncan. She goes outside and throws Scott off the terrace. When they return to the mansion, Professor X wants to help Jean, but she says she is fine. Rogue and Risty had also been hanging out at the mansion. Risty seems unfazed while watching people use superpowers, but then again, Wolverine is chill enough, flaunting his claws. Xavier warns Rogue about inviting outsiders without informing him. Jean's issue of Power Surge escalates the next day during gym. As she succumbs to a headache, a spear flies straight to some girls, including Kitty, but Lance handles the situation. Jean also hurls shot puts, and while Scott and McCoy controls the situation, one shot put ball breaks into the principal's room. Scott and Kitty take an unconscious Jean back to Professor X, who tries to connect with Jean telepathically. However, a power blast from her pushes Professor X to the wall and destroys the lab. Rogue volunteers to siphon Jean's power so that Jean can focus on only one thing, and naturally, Scott volunteers. This is where the series' direction becomes interesting to mind-boggling, as an unconscious Jean could be seen floating with objects flying around her. Professor X explains that Jean's telekinesis is rearranging matters at a molecular level. The scene is quite at par with the X-Men movies, where Jean loses control in a similar manner. Scott, Kitty, Evan, and Kurt help Rogue to reach out to Jean and touch her. Upon contact, Rogue speaks as Jean and Scott help her to concentrate, averting any further crisis. The sappy romance makes for a more flirtatious moment later when Jean is seen recuperating in the garden and Scott delivers her a bouquet of roses, albeit from Duncan. Scott also thanks Rogue for risking so much for Jean. She confesses that Jean would have done the same. Fun and games. The story begins with a malfunction of Juggernaut's security facility. Security officer Captain Stone calls in Professor Xavier. Charles explains the situation to the X-Men's original members, and with Logan on the road and Storm in Africa, Scott and Jean are obligated to manage the Institute. The next day, Jean finds Terran openly flirting with Cyclops. Jean is jealous, but just like Scott, it hurts her ego to accept that, yet it amuses Scott. At school, Kitty crashes 3 computers due to fatigue and sleep deprivation, while Risty could be seen with Weber Torque, a gamer boy playing on another computer. Risty plants an idea for Kitty to throw a party at the mansion while the mentors are gone. Before the big reveal, fans have often speculated Risty as Psylocke due to their British heritage and purple hair. The younger X-Men rejoice at the idea and plan a party, except for Rogue, who has her inhibitions. Xavier helps fix Juggernaut's containment capsule but realizes someone sabotaged the system. At Bayville, the younger X-Men conspire to strand Jean and Scott outside as they get to the party at the mansion. Risty accompanies Weber, or Arcade as he likes to call himself, at the party and shows him around the mansion. They arrive before Cerebro and Arcade hack into the system to gain entry. Arcade reconfigures the helmet so that he can use it. They find the file on New Mutants and Risty asks him to download it. It's incredible that Risty Wilde does not take time to display her true colors, which are blue if you are still guessing. Arcade logs into the program for the Danger Room and thinks of it as a game. This sends an alert to the X-Men, who reaches the room to see what's happening. It is quite astonishing that only the students from Season 1 are alerted of the situation, and the new recruits could be seen enjoying their time at the party with no concern whatsoever for the destruction of properties made by party guests. Nightcrawler teleports inside the room but gets injured and rendered unconscious, while Shadowcat takes Rogue and Spyke inside the room. They work together to rescue each other and fend off the many obstructions. All this while, Jean and Scott have been arguing. Kitty and Kurt had stolen their phone and car keys earlier, so they reaches the mansion with the help of a tow truck. Arcade inadvertently initiates the DEFCON protocol, which is an emergency measure installed to fortify the mansion against dangerous intruders. At the mansion, Risty tries to escape with the CD containing all the data but gets knocked down by a machine, and she transforms into Mystique while unconscious. The design for Mystique has changed from the last time she was shown on episode 13 of Season 1. She does not have a scaly and muscular body but a sleeker version. The protocol shuts down all the doors and windows of the mansion, and machines target Jean and Scott, blowing up his convertible for the second time. As Cyclops and Jean finally join the younger X-Men, they eventually break into Cerebro, and Rogue makes Arcade unconscious. Later, they blame and interrogate Arcady, but Xavier arrives and explains that Arcade is clueless and that another mysterious guest was behind the chaos. The Beast of Bayville. This time the episode focuses on Professor Hank McCoy struggling with his inner beast. It starts with Evan being distracted and skipping class to hang out with his skating buddies. Professor McCoy watches him leave and suddenly leaves the classroom in agony. He repeats lines from a Shakespearean play in the bathroom to control himself. As his condition gets worse, he breaks down a sink and escapes. Later, Evan catches McCoy muttering Shakespeare in an empty amphitheater. However, McCoy does not register Evan and grabs him fiercely. But soon, Hank regains control and leaves. In the Institute, students practice inside the Danger Room and Rogue gets hit in the simulation. While everyone else gets on the platform to finish the simulation, Scott returns to rescue Rogue, but the session ends before they reach the platform. Storm appreciates everybody for their teamwork. However, as Spyke was supposed to have Rogue's back, he was scolded by his friends and Ant for being tardy. Kitty has been stressing about her geometry exams and ordered a ridiculous-looking blue pyramid hat that could boost her brain energy. Whether done intentionally or not, the package containing the order had pride misspelled as pride. The next day, Hank gives Evan Shakespeare's lines to memorize and apologizes for his rude behavior. However, he again loses control during gym class. Hank seeks help from Xavier, who has previously wanted to help him. Hank shares that he has been using a self-contained serum to suppress his mutation, but it doesn't work anymore. Xavier reads Hank's mind and finds that a beast is trying to take over. He encourages Hank to refrain from using the serum and use his own control. Hank ignores Xavier and creates a new potion in the school lab, but this serum turns him into a blue beast-like monster. As he escapes from the school, he comes face to face with Principal Kelly. Kelly finds Hank's lab coat and reports to the police about the event, blaming McCoy. It is possible that with all the attacks, Principal Kelly might feel threatened by the mutants. There is also a possibility that his memories from the ruined soccer game might be intact. News of a beast rampaging across the town sends all the main X-Men on a mission to find and contain him, but the chase becomes futile when the beast escapes. Spyke finds him in the amphitheater, but the beast goes berserk, and even Wolverine finds it challenging to keep up. This is quite intriguing to watch, as Wolverine also has beastly traits but is a mere superhero in front of Hank's werewolf-like love-like affair. Finally, Jean is able to hold off Hank and Professor Xavier connects with him telepathically. Charles helps Hank get control over the beast. As Hank now looks beastly, Charles asks him to stay back and teach the mutant students. It turns out that Season 2 is also about recruitment, and this time it is for teachers. Hank accepts the offer and calls himself the Beast. Adrift. The 6th episode is my favorite one in this season so far. It has the right elements of drama and realistic action sequences. Scott is visiting his brother, but a natural calamity has struck Hawaii. Scott is sitting with a laptop on the beach and communicating with his brother, who has strapped a webcam on his surfboard. Soon, Alex gets swiped away by a riptide, and Scott is willing to call for help. He is stopped by Alex, who does not want to look like a fool. Scott blasts through a closed boat rental place and takes a boat to go out into the sea. However, the brothers have difficulty finding each other, and although Alex shoots energy blasts, it's too far from Scott to reach in time. When Alex gets drained, Scott finally calls for the harbor patrol, but the transmission breaks off. At the Institute, Kitty enjoys planning a mall date with Lance, while Kurt is goofing off with his image inducer and constantly changing his appearance. He meets Jean in the kitchen, who is watching the news about Hawaii and worrying about Scott and Alex. Back at the sea, Scott is still trying to find Alex, and although Alex fires off for the last time, their connection gets lost when Alex falls off the board. Thankfully, Alex resurfaces and manages to climb onto the board, but he is quite wiped out. It's winter in the Institute, and all the new mutants are having fun in the snow with Jean and Beast looking over the kids. Jean gets a call about Scott and Alex and accompanies Charles and Storm to Hawaii. Meanwhile, a rescue chopper is also on the way to find the boys. The fuel on the boys' boat runs out, and their mutant powers are their only defense. Scott blasts through a huge wave, but is soon engulfed in another gigantic wave that topples them off the boat. This sequence makes for an excellent watch, as for once, the X-Men are up against raw nature and no supercharged human with their sinister plans. As the boys keep each other positive, a chopper reaches them and throws down a harness for help. However, lightning breaks the helicopter, and Alex falls back with his harness tied to his body. The rescuers also jump onto the ocean but get separated from the boys. Scott blasts the chopper to secure Alex, but the harness pulls him down. Scott rescues Alex, but they are both spent. While the Coast Guard saves the rescuers, the Blackbird finally locates the boys. The situation gets grimmer when a funnel cloud hits the ocean and the boys start swimming from it. Simultaneously, the Blackbird appears, and while Storm holds back the tornado, Jean uses her telekinesis to lift Scott and Alex. This scene had me on edge, but it ends well as the jet flies off to Bayville with everyone inside and safe. The episode ends much lighter, with Professor X pranking Kurt by changing his image inducer to make him look like a girl. African Storm. Although this season has its fair bit of standalone episodes, together they have elements of significant character-focused and character development-based storylines. This part unfolds with a scene where several African people are chanting together and dancing around a fire. Hungan, a tribal witch doctor, proclaims his win over the wandering goddess, the Wind Rider. They lit a wooden statue on fire that represented Storm. Back in Bayville, Jean gets more annoyed with the Scott and Taryn relationship. She angrily knocks down Evan for nicking her milk. At the Institute, Storm gets fidgety and anxious as she waits for Evan in the danger room. When he arrives, she starts a simulation where Evan has to rescue her. Storm suddenly gets trapped in a box during the session and panics. After getting out of the danger room, Storm feels like someone is following her. Storm shares her worries about Evan with Beast, who hands her Evan's trampled report card. That night, Risty drops off Rogue in front of a foggy Institute. Later at night, shadowy figures shrouded in mist encroach upon Storm, waking her up. Logan comes in to check in with her, and so do Kitty and Xavier. It is most likely that Logan and Storm are in a relationship, as he is often the first one to appear for her. Logan also looks more concerned and ready to fight for the woman in despair. However, they could not find anybody, and Charles suggests that Storm is stressed about Evan. He suggests calling Storm's sister so Evan could return to his parents. Evan overhears this and gets visibly upset. The next day, Storm freaks out for the third time when she sees an image of a white skull drawn on her bathroom mirror. She sits down in terror as the bathroom water overflows. Kitty finds her this time and shows the professor that Storm has broken the bathroom mirror. Meanwhile, Evan packs his belongings in the Institute and clears his school locker. At school, Rogue gossips about Storm with Risty, who seems aware of Storm's claustrophobia. This is the first time Storm's fears are addressed in this series. However, her claustrophobia has often been mentioned in other versions of the X-Men animated series. Back in the Institute, Storm misses her session with New Mutants, who prove quite a handful for the gullible Hank McCoy. Later, Storm finds Evan leaving the Institute on his skateboard and runs into Narambo, one of the old tribesmen who warns her about about Hungan. She ignores the advice and runs, looking for Evan, but several tribal men chase after her and kidnap her. Evan witnesses the incident and reports to Xavier. The team marches out to the dockyard, but again Wolverine reaches first. They locate where she is confined in a crate. Hungan has already captured Storm's soul through his staff, and he wielded it to control Storm, who attacked the X-Men. The dockyard is also misty, which might be caused by Hungan's magical powers. The X-Men fight the tribal men, and Spyke breaks the crystal on Hungan's staff. Storm gives Hungan a taste of her power, and all the tribe members vanish in the mist after Storm blows away Hungan. The next day, Evan's mother decides to let him stay back. Joyride. X-Men Evolution never fails to surprise us with its often drastic change of story arcs, and this time we find Avalanche breaking into Xavier's Institute in the middle of the night. This triggers the security system, and Avalanche uses his powers to destroy them. The X-Men all head out searching for the danger and are ready to fight, but they are baffled when Avalanche declares that he wants to join the X-Men. Despite Scott's objections, Professor X lets Lance join the team, and wait, did I see Wolverine smile? The man is definitely getting softer. Professor X tells Scott that Lance wants to join to be closer to Kitty, and they should give him a chance. Kitty shows Lance his room, which is a mighty upgrade from his arrangements with the Brotherhood. The next day, Lance goes through the usual training for the X-Men and is almost sick while riding a simulation for the Blackbird. While the first batch of X-Men is training the new mutants, Kurt is occupied with cleaning the hangar and the aircraft, which is a probation he received for aiding Boom Boom. Lance goes through other training sessions, but Scott does not cut him any slack. The Brotherhood is also upset with him for leaving the group. That night, Lance witnesses the new mutants sneaking off but faints when he sees Kitty's head on a plate. The new mutants take the Hummer for a spin and wreak havoc across the street. The following day, the car is found in dreadful condition, just like Scott's car the previous day. At this point, I am pretty sure Scott's car is cursed. Nonetheless, Scott indirectly blames Lance for the disaster. Avalanche and Cyclops' rivalry in this series is quite similar to the Wolverine and Cyclops rivalry in the comics. Moreover, in the comics, Quicksilver joins the good side instead of Avalanche. The same night, Jubilee, Bobby, and Sam ask Lance to join them for another Joyride, but he declines. However, he quickly realizes that the kids are going for the Blackbird this time, and he pulls Kitty out of her room to get on the aircraft. As the Blackbird flies, Jubilee opens a hatch and shoots fireworks. But as Lance and Kitty appear, Jubilee gets surprised and her fireworks accidentally damage the jet's control panels. Bobby loses the thrust control, and Kitty fails to connect to the Institute when the radio is fired. They are soon intercepted by Air Force jets, and when Lance tries to take control of the situation, he accidentally sends out a missile, making the Air Force consider the jet hostile. As the Air Force follows Blackbird, Kitty finally gets rid of them by phasing the aircraft through a mountain. That was an excellent maneuver, an example of how even the simplest powers could be used most effectively. The next day, Scott blames Lance again for the condition of the jet, and Lance does not deny the allegations. However, the new mutants confess their crimes and even joke about trashing Logan's motorcycle. Are they mad? That would have meant the end of the world. With Kurt's probation finally over, Professor X puts the new mutants on probation. However, Lance decides to leave the X-Men as it's too much for him, but he does get a kiss on the cheek from Kitty before leaving the mansion. On Angel's Wings. Keeping in line with the famous holiday-themed trope, we finally have a Christmas episode with lighthearted storytelling and soothing music. The episode starts with a man with angel-like wings saving a disabled woman from a burning building in New York. The scene shifts to Bayville after the credits. It's a pre-Christmas and farewell party at the mansion before everyone leaves for the holidays. Logan is back from his road trip and is still normally grumpy. Jean gifts the girls pendants while Kurt is on a mission to kiss Kitty but ends up kissing Bobby, aka Iceman. Rogue also gifts a sweater to Scott, and with Jean leaving for home, it's her chance to make a move. Although it appears Jean is not too happy about it. Meanwhile, Angel saves another man from being robbed in the street, and news about his good work quickly becomes public. The scene features Angle reading the Daily Bugle, which is a great reference to Spider-Man. When Charles reads the news, Rogue volunteers to go with Scott to check out the issue. Interestingly, an older man has been keeping a watch on Angel, and just as anyone could have guessed, the man is Magneto, who uses his powers to cause an accident on the Brooklyn Bridge. Although Angel rescues everyone on the bridge, Magneto uses his power to sabotage Angel's reputation. Magneto tricks Angel by pulling at his leg, which knocks off a little girl called Haley from the bridge. Angel rescues the girl, but she is unconscious, and Magneto instigates the crowd against him. On the other hand, Scott and Rogue had been interviewing various people in New York to learn about Angel, and in a tender moment, Scott also shares his belief about guardian angels saving his brother Alex. Angel checks on Haley in the hospital, but he is spotted by Rogue and Scott, who had been inquiring about him. Angel goes to the church where Haley's parents are praying, but Magneto approaches him. When Angel refuses to join Magneto, he chains Angel, but Cyclops and Rogue also appear to thwart Magneto. In the ensuing fight, Rogue touches Magneto momentarily and follows him as he flees. The scene shows several buildings in New York, including the Stark Enterprises and Chrysler Building. The X-Men comics, however, have more references to other Marvel heroes. For instance, in the comics, Kurt's image inducer is a cell phone made by Tony Stark. Coming back to the episode, Magneto sends several obstacles to stop Rogue, and when she almost falls over, Angel comes to rescue her, scooping her up in the most dramatic manner. Later at the hospital, Rogue and Scott invite Angel to meet Charles Xavier at the Institute, and although the little girl Haley wakes up, Scott realizes that Angel won't be joining them. The last moment of the episode shows a beautiful montage of the rest of the main X-Men enjoying themselves with their respective families. A scene featuring Kitty lighting a menorah also pays homage to her Jewish heritage. While Wolverine plays pool alone, Charles and Hank enjoy drinks by the Christmas tree. Mindbender. This is not your run-of-the-mill standalone episode, as the events of this episode will have later repercussions. It begins with Jean waking up from a nightmare of terrifying clowns. A jack-in-the-box at her bedside table turns on automatically as the music starts playing, and suddenly, a tattooed face pops up, which makes Jean scream. This is the first episode in the series where Jean's fear of clowns, or coulrophobia, is shown. Jean goes missing, and everyone looks for her in different places. Kitty even visits the Brotherhood, but a tremor shows that Lance is displeased as he feels they are blamed for kidnapping. Meanwhile, Beast and Xavier have scanned the news and used Cerebro, respectively, to no avail. On the other hand, the New Mutants have not learned their lesson, as they sneak into the Danger Room without an instructor. Finally, we know why the New Mutants were not helping when Arcady controlled the Danger Room. However, they tend to leave Jamie behind for his ability to form multiple clones of himself. Multiple takes his revenge by controlling the Danger Room and giving the New Mutants a tough time. The others find out Jean has been in Boston and has used her powers to steal a ring from a museum. But before the X-Men can find her, she leaves, and it becomes difficult for Cerebro to track her until she uses her powers again. Scenes covering Jean show her casually using her powers, like a hypnotized person. She enters the Institute at night, but Scott sees her. Jean uses her mind control and telekinesis to put Scott back to sleep while she walks to Kurt's room to hypnotize him. Scott reports the news to Xavier, while Kurt also goes missing. Kitty and Beast find out that the airport surveillance cameras spotted Jean and Kurt leaving for New York. In New York, Jean and Kurt break into a bank to steal a second ring. Jean uses telekinesis to push Wolverine and Cyclops outside the bank, and before they can recuperate, Jean and Kurt leave with the X-Jet. Beast's research shows that the rings are from an ancient Han dynasty. Jean comes back to the Institute to possess Spike and Kitty. Xavier senses Jean's presence and tries to read her mind, but it's obstructed as he sees the face of the tattooed man. The next day, Rogue helps Xavier identify the man as someone who was in the carnival a week before. The man is revealed to Mesmero, a mutant with mind control abilities. In the comics, Mesmero is green and brainwashes the X-Men to be a part of a circus. In this episode, the X-Men arrive at the Circus of Mystery. While the X-Men fight to subdue their hypnotized friends, Charles strains himself to subdue Mesmero. It's pretty warming to see Wolverine unable to hurt Kitty, further showing his special attachment to the kid. Charles tries to stop Jean from handing over the rings, but Mesmero still grabs it and escapes. Later, Xavier confesses to Logan about a greater power at play, which stops him from reading and controlling Mesmero. Right on cue, a piece of Indian music introduces Tibet, where Mesmero sneaks into a temple in the mountains and uses the keys to open the first door for the resurrection of Apocalypse. Shadow Dance. Although the previous episode introduces Apocalypse into the plot, it doesn't yet become a part of the main story. Episode 11 begins on familiar premises like Xavier's Institute, where Kitty and Rogue discuss who they will ask for the school dance. Jean joins them at the elevator as they head out to the Danger Room, where Forge is working on a new device to increase Kurt's teleportation strength, enabling him to travel more than 2 miles. While teleporting slowly, Kurt goes through another dimension filled with hot lava and several dinosaur-like creatures. Kurt lands back in Forge's Forge's old lab in the school, but a momentary rift appears after he leaves. At school, Kitty asks out Lance, who takes a moment before saying yes. In math class, a girl called Amanda asks Kurt for the dance. Meanwhile, Forge, Xavier, and Wolverine gather data from Kurt's jump and come across a tape of the creature in the dimension. Back at school, Spyke and Cyclops advise Kurt to wear gloves for the dance to hide his two-digit hands. They spot Jean approaching Cyclops, but before she can ask, Terran sweeps in, asking Scott for the dance. Rogue and Risty observe the development and plan to go together. At the Brotherhood Manor, everyone teases Lance but decides to attend the dance together. Later, Nightcrawler and Wolverine again go through the dimension, but the creatures attack them. They somehow make it back to the school gym before the dance. Kurt is traumatized by the experience and vows never to do it again, while Wolverine shares his concern. At night, everyone enjoys the dance except for Jean, as Duncan is busy chatting with his friends. An Easter egg in this scene is a green-haired girl on the dance floor who is probably Quicksilver's half-sister Polaris. Amanda confesses that she knows about Kurt's secret but ignores it. The party is soon disrupted when the rift opens up in Forge's lab and several other dimension creatures enter. Boom Boom, Toad, and Blob are the first to encounter the monsters. On the dance floor, Lance saves Kitty, while Scott and Jean use their powers openly to stop the beast. Since the rift also opened in the danger room, Forge, Xavier, and Logan use Forge's previous teleportation device to remove the creatures. They goes to the school to catch the creatures. On the other hand, Amanda forces Kurt to teleport, and it is clear that she saw Kurt when he once deactivated the image inducer and teleported. This is a reference to the episode of Shadowed Past from Season 1. Amanda is a sorceress and Kurt's longtime love interest in the comics. In the series, she lacks powers but still harbors a crush since she is curious about him. Lance has been tagging along with the X-Men but stays with the Brotherhood as the others leave. The episode ends on another lovable note as Kurt reveals his true self to Amanda and goes on an ice cream date. Retreat. This standalone episode starts with Beast enjoying a midnight outing, but he is soon spotted by some cops who chase after him. In the dark, his body appears grayer than blue, which was the initial intention of the designers. The following day, he shares his woes with Charles, and Kitty eavesdrops. Kitty conspires with Charles to plan a retreat for the underperforming New Mutants at Redwood Forest. Beast takes Iceman, Spyke, Wolfsbane, Sunspot, and Kitty to the retreat. In the forest, Hank and the children enjoy a good time, except for Spyke, who is affected by poison ivy. A scene also features Sunspot and Wolfsbane flirting before Beast showers them with water drops. Thinking of going back depresses Hank, and he wanders off when someone video records him. The man who took the video shows it to others at a nearby hunting camp, and all of them think of him as Bigfoot. On the other side, Beast gives the kids an assignment and wanders off again, but he soon runs into some of the hunters. He growls and rolls a stone to shoo away the hunters. However, two poachers tranquilize him, and a scientist captures him in a magnetic cage. But when the poachers talk about conducting taxidermy on him, the scientist feels guilty. When the hunters are away, Beast speaks to the scientist and convinces him to open the cage. However, the hunters arrive and the scientist promises to release him later. It's important to note that WB Kids were very restrictive in the first season and did not want the series to be too dark for the kid audiences. Yet the success of the first season helped loosen the restrictions a bit. Moreover, such restrictions have helped develop a more character-driven story. Coming back to the episode, the mutants are soon alerted when they cannot find their favorite Teach, and they decide to follow Wolfsbane to find Hank. Meanwhile, rain and landslides throw the hunters' cars into a flooding river, but luckily he is spotted by the kids. The mutants help rescue Beast, as the episode uses a unique approach to demonstrate the individual powers of these new mutants. Iceman builds a bridge to stop water flow, while Sunspot uses sunlight to fire up and dive into the water. He breaks open the magnetic bars and pulls Beast out of the water. The students in Beast also rescue the other hunters. However, the poachers are still bent on capturing Bigfoot. The students again work together and flaunt their power to scare away the two hunters. The scientist is glad to find Beast among his extraordinary students and decides to keep mum when he returns to the Bigfoot enthusiast hunting group. The episode ends with Beast flying back with the students, this time quite satisfied.
And here's why.
Walk on the Wild Side. This segment is all about girl power and focuses mainly on the X-women. At the beginning of the episode, Jean is training Amara, a mutant named Magma, to melt boulders and form a stone bridge at one of the very lower levels under the Institute. Amara is not confident, and Jean boosts her up, but when a boulder starts falling upon them, Scott blasts it into pieces. The girls get mad due to Scott's intervention as they don't want to play second fiddle to typically strong men. Tabitha annoys the boys at the Brotherhood house and drives away with Lance's Jeep. It's Amara's first day in school and she befriends Tabitha, who promises to show her some fun afterward. On their way to the shopping mall, Tabitha and Amara come across some carjackers and race them. Jean had been following them in Scott's car and prevented the carjackers from killing civilians. When Tabitha and Amara finally catch up with the perpetrators, they almost destroy the vehicle. But before the perpetrators could leave, Jean used her powers to trap them. The girls leave before the police arrive. The episode continues with its unique take on girl power as a music montage shows Tabitha, Jean, and Amara going shopping together, and they are soon joined by Kitty and Rogue. The girls dance and change into new black rock costumes as they keep on their secret vigilante work. Soon their good deeds were on the news, and they were now called the Bayville Sirens. At school, the girls walk together in rhythm while everyone gawks at them in awe. This scene and the music montage pay homage to scenes from movies like The Craft, She's All That, and Coyote Ugly. The episode also plays a track called Walking on the Wild Side, which is the title of the episode. Risty also watches the girls but appears displeased by the development. Scott also figured out the secret and recruited Kurt to keep an eye on the girls. That night, Tabitha breaks into the bathroom for the second time while Toad is taking a bath. It's quite shocking that he is taking such frequent showers. Boom Boom steals Lance's Jeep and goes to the Institute to pick up the other girls. Scott and Kurt follow them, but not without Jean noticing. Soon, the Sirens come across a team of carjackers, but it's a trap. The girls track the car to a warehouse where the boss catches them. The girls soon round up all the crooks, but accidentally set the place on fire. Scott also deflects a car from afar, but the girls do not notice him. The girls get caught by a policewoman who allows them to escape for doing an excellent job of catching criminals. However, she asks them to stop their vigilante act. It turns out the policewoman was Mystique, who I guess did not want to get left behind from some girl action. The episode ends with Jean sharing her experience with Scott. Operation Rebirth. At the beginning of the episode, Wolverine is chased by a military group's Alpha team. They corner Logan on a cliff, and Nick Fury emerges from one of the helicopters calling him Weapon X. Logan doesn't want to talk to him, but Fury blackmails him by threatening to blow up his beloved motorbike. At this point, everybody knows that the vehicle is his true love. Fury informs Logan that a backup Rebirth machine has been stolen from a high-security Shield facility. The evidence of broken metals and magnetic pulses indicates that Magneto was behind the theft. At the Institute, Logan rehashes the history of Rebirth to Charles. A monochromatic flashback shows how Steve Rogers gained his superhuman strength through the machine and became Captain America, fighting the World War. A young Logan had fought alongside Cap, which surprises even Charles, keeping him wondering about Logan's actual age. Now, it's common knowledge that Marvel likes to expand their universe and has placed much pressure on the creators to introduce more Avenger characters. But with the showrunner's inclination to keep the story limited to the mutants, Captain America only guest starred with no dialogue. Xavier uses Cerebro to find Magneto, while Kurt and Rogue overhear them. Rogue shares how she saw a dome in the Sahara Desert when she touched Magneto during Christmas in New York. Charles sends Kurt and Rogue with Wolverine to find him. On their way, Wolverine has another flashback featuring Cap and how they teamed up to save prisoners of war in Poland, which included a young boy called Eric Lenscher. The boy used his powers to deflect bombs and was none other than Magneto. Wolverine shares how the Rebirth was actually killing the Cap. A flashback shows that the duo even destroyed the machine. On reaching the desert, the Wolverine, Rogue, and Nightcrawler take out XTV bikes but are soon attacked. Nightcrawler teleports them inside the dome, but Sabretooth launches an attack. As per the writer, director, and producer Boyd Kirkland, several restrictions were imposed by the network on showing Wolverine. These limitations on the extent of violence that could be used were due to the children-focused target audience. However, this episode visualizes a great deal of his power and strength. Steel beams trap Kurt and Rogue, but Kurt teleports to the Rebirth's controller. Kurt sees Magneto inside the machine, who manipulates him into not destroying the machine. Magneto has been dying of old age and uses the Rebirth machine to replenish himself. However, Wolverine stops the process midway and brings out Magneto before destroying the machine. Magneto has turned few years younger and lets the X-Men leave for saving his life. He gestures to both Kurt and Logan with his comment. The episode ends with Wolverine visiting Captain America, who is lying inside a cryogenic chamber. The Hex Factor. Remember the all-powerful Scarlet Witch? Well, X-Men Evolution formally introduces the character of Wanda Maximoff as Magneto's daughter. Xavier goes to visit Wanda in a psychiatric hospital where she is restrained against her will. She breaks open her restraints and is about to attack the professor, but he connects with her first. Their interaction is cut short when a doctor asks to take Wanda away for some radiology examinations. Something about how the doctor moves is quite alerting, and sure enough, he turns out to be Mystique, who breaks Wanda out of the facility. Outside, an older woman is waiting for them. The woman chants something in Gaelic to control Wanda. At school, Kitty forces Kurt to try out her muffins, which are a disaster. While Jean and Scott are about to discuss their feelings, Duncan interrupts them. Mystique makes a grand entrance at the Brotherhood house, shocking the boys. She reproves them for losing out to the X-Men and turning the house upside down. She also asks Boom Boom to move from her room. Mystique then introduces Wanda, who goes mad after seeing Pietro and almost brings down the house upon them. The older woman is now introduced as Agatha Harkness, who chants to pacify and control Wanda. In the comics, Agatha is the one who trained Wanda and is actually a good witch, whereas in the recent Disney Plus series, she has been a charming villain. Boom Boom leaves the house for good, which ensures her departure from the Brotherhood. As a parting gift, she blows up Mystique's room, which makes me ready to forgive her for past mistakes. Mystique informs Pietro that the file that she downloaded with the help of Arcady detailed information on Charles's several sessions with Wanda that would now help to control her. Back at the Institute, Charles explains everything about Wanda and that her anger and messed up mind was a result of being abandoned by her father in the hospital when she was just a child. Wanda has flashbacks of how she was forcefully taken inside the hospital while her father, Magento, and a child, Pietro, watched from the other side of the road. Pietro approaches Wanda, claiming their father had no choice since she became uncontrollable, but Wanda is set on revenge. In the comics, the opposite happens, as Wanda is the tolerable one while Pietro is the one who despises Magneto. Pietro agrees to join Mystique in her revenge on Magneto. Charles learns through Cerebro that Wanda has joined the Brotherhood and that they are at a mall. He sends the students to find out what's happening. The X-Men fight the Brotherhood and defeat them. A scene where Toad steals Cyclops' visor references a similar sequence in the first movie. Wanda appears in her new short haircut and uses strong magic that forces the X-Men to retreat. The Brotherhood celebrates victory and names Wanda as the Scarlet Witch. Charles is, however, optimistic that this failure would be a lesson for his X-Men.
2, 1.
Day of Reckoning Part 1 and 2. Similar to Season 1, the Season 2 finale comprises of a two-part story. The story begins with Wolverine chasing after Sabretooth in the sewers. Wolverine is again chased by a group of soldiers headed by Bolivar Trask, a mutant hater. I feel the character of Trask was not well built up in this series, as there was no clear background to his character or apparent mutant hatred. He traps Wolverine in some form of green fluid that freezes him while magnetic interference lets Sabretooth escape. Jean is on the Cerebro at the Institute and she loses Wolverine's signal. She informs Xavier, who is guiding her. In the sewer, Beast and Storm look for Wolverine and find a broken cage, which alerts them about Magneto. At the Brotherhood house, Mystique informs them of Wolverine's abduction and asks them to prepare for their move. Xavier runs complex simulations at the Institute to prepare the X-Men to face Magneto. Xavier appears furious at the X-Men's performance and bars the New Mutants from joining the mission. Seeing Xavier be too rigid and harsh with the X-Men is shocking. He brings in the Brotherhood to assist them in their mission. Scott is pissed by Xavier's attitude and takes his leave. Meanwhile, Trask ships Wolverine into a military-like compound and uses him as a test subject for his Sentinel program against the mutants. Jean finally locates Wolverine and Xavier tells her to prepare the team. Mystique is then shown inside Cerebro as she initiates the DEFCON 4 protocol. Next, Charles joins the team on the XM Velocity but leaves without waiting for Scott. These events do not add up, and Charles's changed behavior doesn't leave much doubt that Mystique has morphed into the Professor. The New Mutants try to escape before the shutters of the mansion close, and Amara escapes by an inch. Tabby also shows up to warn them about Mystique and rescues Amara. They find Scott in a lookout area and inform him about the incidents. The trio reaches the backway entrance from where Scott and Jean had previously entered the mansion. A self-destruction sequence starts simultaneously with only 10 minutes to go. Wolverine fights against the Sentinel at Trask's compound, but is eventually knocked out as Task gears up for additional tests. In the city, Magneto's travel sphere from the Season 1 finale shows up and reveals Magneto's team consisting of Sabretooth, Gambit, Pyro, and Colossus. This is the first time the Acolytes are introduced in the series, but they don't have any dialogue in Season 2. As per Boyd Kirkland, the Acolytes were introduced as a bigger challenge for the X-Men since the Brotherhood didn't amount to much. It's more intriguing since, as per the comics, Gambit and Colossus are not the bad guys and are popular X-Men characters. However, these stories were not adequately explored in the series due to the lack of a 5th season. The second part of the story focuses on the face-off with Magneto, who has another grand plan of revealing the existence of mutants out in the world. The students inside the mansion try different ways to escape while Amara digs a tunnel to enter the mansion from the back way. Above Trask's compound, the X-Men and Brotherhood split into different teams to search the area for Magneto and his crew, but just then, Gambit's card alerts them. The other teams fight Magneto's crew, but Wanda realizes everything is a trap, and she scans the nearby buildings for Magneto. Back at the Institute, Scott, Tabby, and Amara finally join the others in the control room, but only with a few seconds before self-destruction, they agree to follow Scott. As they run away, the blast is shown from above, which brings the whole mansion down. People from the Trask lab finally catch up on the fight above them, and Trask orders to bring up the Sentinel online. During their battle, Rogue comes face to face with Gambit and is immediately mesmerized. She looks like she is in a trance when Gambit hands her a Queen of Hearts card. Upon realization, she throws the card away. The other iconic couple from the comics include Shadowcat and Colossus, who share a scene in which Shadowcat pulls Colossus inside a building and then asks Avalanche to knock it down. Amidst the fight, Storm observes Wanda going after Magneto, who's standing atop a building in the distance. He is now accompanied by Quicksilver, which shows that he is still the double agent and loyal to his father. Magneto reveals his plan to Pietro, bringing the Sentinel and Wolverine above ground. Magneto's acolytes leave in the spheres while the remaining mutants go against the Sentinel. As a reporter covers the scene from a chopper, the world sees the news, including those in Bayville. The Sentinel shoots the green liquid to capture several mutants, including Blob, Spyke, Rogue, and Beast. The Marines and police also arrive, but Magneto stops the Marines. However, Nightcrawler grabs a grenade from the Marines and throws it into the Sentinel's armor. Wanda finally subdues Quicksilver and attacks Magneto, stopping him from using his powers. Xavier also flies the jet to attack the Sentinel, and finally, missiles hit the Sentinel, bringing it down on a building and Magneto. Nightcrawler teleports Wanda, and the survivors regroup, but Xavier only takes the survivors aboard, promising to return for others. They are shocked upon arriving at the Institute, and the new mutants and Scott come out to meet them. Scott looks wounded, and his shirt is in shreds. He throws Xavier to the ground, blaming him for everything, and just as anyone would have guessed, he transforms into Mystique. The season ends on a cliffhanger, with Mystique claiming everything will be worse from this moment.
What do you want?
Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. I've been tracking you for hours.
Season 3. Day of Recovery. We are now officially into a new story arc, as after last season's cliffhanger finale, the X-Men and the Brotherhood can be found stranded, while the Professor's whereabouts are still a mystery. Scott and Jean threaten Mystique to reveal Charles Xavier's location, but before she can surrender, they are surrounded by police cars and helicopters. The new mutants are headed by Boom Boom and Berserker, who take them to a sewer for safety. Berserker, or Ray, claims to know someone from the sewers. Wanda saves the Brotherhood while Jean gets shoved into a police vehicle. Kurt hijacks the police car and starts picking up other teammates. Simultaneously, Storm saves Scott. The identity of several mutants became public, causing mass hysteria among the people. The mutants finally regroup at the lookout, where Mystique declares that she is not involved in Magneto's scheme. Although every X-Men is infuriated by Mystique and the Brotherhood, they are still willing to work together to free the other mutants taken in by the military. Nick Fury arrives to help the mutants search for their mentors. He hands over a disc containing information, but it's snatched by Mystique, who wants to be in charge. The younger mutants meet Caliban in the sewer and follow him. An interesting tidbit about this episode is that it was nominated for the Golden Reel Award for Best Sound Editing in Television. Yet I feel this episode was relatively lackluster compared to the high-end drama and action sequence seen in the last episode of Season 2. However, it's all up to perspective, as the episode is one of the highest rated in the series. Meanwhile, Toad and Scarlet Witch visit New York, where they scan video footage of the incident. They discover Magneto to be alive, as Quicksilver had rescued his father before the Sentinel fell over them. Toad in the comics is British, while it's quite uncanny that despite being an American cartoon, the voice artists are primarily Canadian. Wanda is seriously miffed and wants her revenge. Jean steals the XM Velocity from custody. She and the other mutants, including Mystique, head off to the coordinates given by Nick Fury. The place turns out to be Area 51, which is rumored to be where the U.S. Army experiments on aliens. At the Area 51 compound, the green stasis is broken to interrogate the mutants. Wolverine, Blob, Spyke, and Rogue get freed and escape, with Scott and Mystique being the last to get through. However, Scott traps Mystique and asks her about Charles Xavier, but it's already too late as the military is fast approaching. Scott and the rest escape, leaving Mystique trapped inside. The Brotherhood gets back to their house as Toad continues to flirt with Wanda. The X-Men also assemble to discuss how to find Professor X.
You think that fancy vice is gonna stop me? Nothing stops me!
The stuff of heroes. A more affirmative plot could be seen from this point. With the secrets of the mutants out in the world, it's time for a witch hunt, where troops are swarming the streets in search of the X-Men. Logan and Rogue get spotted in a convenience store and run for Wolverine's beloved red motorbike, but this time Rogue's driving. At the same time, Storm and Beast make a grand entry into a congressional hearing for the mutant menace. They plead their case, but the speaker shows a video of a juggernaut causing a nuisance at a dam. This season has completely revamped the opening sequence, which includes new scenes and the Beast as one of the highlighted X-Men. This time, the extended opening sequence also features non-credited glimpses of Charles, Mystique, and Magneto, who were previously not shown for being too mainstream. This change could be related to the drastic change in the show's tone this season. The X-Men have been trying to catch the news live from a makeshift projector in a cave. They are shocked to see how Juggernaut is on the loose. Rogue and Wolverine enter the cave and break the projection. They have the military on their tail, who orders the X-Men to surrender. Logan and Scott fight over the decision on whether to fight back or stop further antagonizing the military. Scott speaks like a true-born leader and Charles's ideal student when he points out the need to show that the mutants are friends and heroes. This is the first instance of Wolverine and Cyclops fighting in the series, which is relatively common in the comics. Meanwhile, Juggernaut breaks a dam and is about to cause more damage. Jean encourages Cyclops to take charge and do what Charles would have done. They head for the dam to stop Juggernaut. The X-Men manages to pull off his headgear, and Cyclops uses his powers to blast off Juggernaut while two reporters cover the entire incident. Despite Cyclops using his full power, Juggernaut proves stronger. When Cyclops is famished, Rogue takes over. She gains the same powers and knocks him off while Iceman freezes him in a block of ice, which falls into the river and cannot be found later. Everyone at the congressional meeting watches the incident live, as Storm and Beast argue that the primary purpose of the X-Men is to be prepared for such situations and act for the good. On the other hand, Rogue informs that Juggernaut's memories have shown her whereabouts of Xavier. They rescue Xavier from Juggernaut's holding tank. The scene shows Wolverine appreciating Cyclops, but for some strange reason, his uniform has changed into black and gold, like his Ultimate X-Men comic avatar. They catch the news later, where the president clears the X-Men of all charges and takes Trask into custody for the Sentinel fiasco. Magneto and his crew also see the news, but they might not be happy with the outcome. Mainstream. The last two seasons of X-Men Evolution deviate significantly from the previous two seasons. As the stakes were raised, the pros of serial storytelling and maintaining continuity gained more traction than the standalone episodes of the earlier seasons. Therefore, the initial episodes of this season are concentrated on the aftermath of the mutants' exposure to the world. Episode 3 depicts a time a few days after the president's message. Xavier's Institute is being rebuilt, but it's difficult for the seniors and the new mutants to cohabit with limited means. One night, Kitty and Kurt witness some suspicious boys entering the premises. However, it turns out the boys are some jerks from the school wearing monster masks who have been vandalizing the walls with crude graffiti about the X-Men. The next day, Logan and Xavier discuss how Jubilee and Wolfsbane are taken home by their parents as the Institute is no longer safe. Both of them self-blame for the problem. Later, Charles tells the older students that the school board will hold a meeting that night to decide on banning the mutants from school, and therefore they should make the best impression in school in the morning. But as expected, nothing goes right. Everybody in school shuns the X-Men, while Kurt uses his image inducer to look normal, as his real identity is not yet revealed. Taryn looks at Scott with disdain, and Duncan calls Jean's power a problem, to which Jean breaks up with him for good and pulls a gleeful Scott away. Logan is riding his motorbike in the street when Colossus appears in front of him, riding another bike. He gestures at Wolverine to follow. Meanwhile, Principal Kelly must have had enough with the mutants and plots against the mutants. He invites the Brotherhood back to school. It also appears that Kitty has broken up with Lance after the whole fiasco involving Mystique. Kurt tries extremely hard at school to conceal his mutant identity, and Amanda is not too happy about it. When Duncan tries to hurt Scott and force him to use his powers, Kurt sees it from hiding, too afraid to intervene. Scott protects himself, keeping his eyes closed, while Kitty and Rogue help him. Jean also faces discrimination while practicing basketball as she is accused of cheating. Principal Kelly calls Duncan and asks him to take the Brotherhood's help in taking down Scott while he removes all the athletic trophies Jean or any mutant won. On the other side, Logan follows Colosseus into a barn, and Colosseus throws away Logan's bike, setting it ablaze. Now that's an absolute horror and entirely unnecessary, but it gains Wolverine's attention. Colossus delivers Magneto's message to Logan, asking him to join Magneto's fight to defend the mutants against people. Logan refuses and asks Colossus to join the X-Men, as it's evident that Colossus is somehow being forced to join Magneto. At night, Jean delivers a moving speech to convince the parents, but outside, Duncan, along with the Brotherhood, fights the senior X-Men students. Kitty blames Lance, who gets further vengeful and causes severe tremors that jeopardize the safety of the people. While Kelly tries to convince everybody against the X-Men, the students, including Kurt, still save the parents and even the principal. However, Charles informs later that the school board has not banned them. The stuff of villains. Wanda is back after being fairly absent since the Mystique and Magneto incidents. She meets Caliban, who has the power to find other mutants. Wanda asks him to find Magneto, and he confesses that Magneto is too powerful for him. However, he helps her find Pietro. At the Institute, the new mutants help Storm and Beast clear the debris while construction trucks arrive to rebuild the mansion. Beast looks pleased as the older students rush off to school. The Brotherhoods are again messing around Pietro's room in their house. Toad is wearing one of Pietro's Quicksilver costumes and goofing around, but Lance is not amused. Toad accidentally breaks into Wanda's room and finds her missing. Elsewhere, Wanda finds Pietro in a coffee shop, and since he refuses to give up information on their father, she traps him in the freezer and delivers it in front of police patrol cars. At the school, Lance and the rest of the Brotherhood get expelled by Kelly, which upsets Lance. On the school grounds, he meets Gambit, who asks him to gather the rest of the Brotherhood for a meeting. At the same time, Evan is teased by some boys, and he pops his spikes, but he finds it extremely difficult to retract them. This scene is an indication of Spike's evolving powers. The thugs are caught and threatened by Gambit. Rogue confronts Gambit on the school premises, but he blows her off and leaves. Rogue gets hold of Kitty and forces her to tag along in her pursuit of Gambit. Lance returns to the Brotherhood with a warning, but Gambit appears immediately. After a bit of show of power, Gambit takes Toad hostage and asks them to join Magneto, but first, they must help Pietro escape from the police. As the boys leave for their mission, Kitty and Rogue follow them. Kitty wants to call Scott, but Rogue forces her to phase through several vehicles to follow Lance's Jeep. They finally arrive near a mountain road where the Brotherhood ambushes a military convoy holding Pietro. When the truck containing Pietro starts to fall, Kitty saves him, but he remains ungrateful. As he escapes, Wanda watches from afar and waits another day to get him. On the other hand, Rogue saves Major Kyle and zaps Lance. After the Brotherhood leaves, the military catches Kitty and Rogue, but Major Kyle lets them go, as not everybody hates mutants. Finally, there is a character that's different from the rest of humankind and shows some conscience. Gambit visits the Brotherhood house where, interestingly, Blob is reading a comic book that seems based on the 90s X-Men, the animated series. This is an homage paid to the landmark series. Gambit is followed by Pietro, who takes charge and pledges to defeat the X-Men. Back at the Institute, Kitty and Rogue confess to Charles and Xavier, who appreciate their effort but encourage them to live their own life and not always get involved. It's great to see Scott's evolution into a better and more mature leader as he informs the girls about their detention, but remember to keep the tone light. Blind Alley. If you have not forgotten, Scott trapped Mystique in Area 51 when they went to rescue the other mutants captured by the military. The story begins inside Area 51, where scientists run tests on Mystique. Mystique escapes. overpowering a female scientist and continuously morphing into different people. She finally flies away, morphed into a raven. At Bayville, the Institute is almost restored, with all the mutant residents working together to put up the final touches of security and finesse. Scott and Wolverine are working on fixing a satellite dish on a roof. They look dapper as they have stripped off their shirts, and Jean finds it quite distracting to focus on her work of levitating things. While Scott seeks guidance from Logan about confessing his feelings, Storm encourages Jean to do the same. But before Jean can share her feelings, Scott receives a call from Alex, who is stranded in Mexico. When Scott arrives, Alex transforms into Mystique and knocks him out with gas. Scott wakes up in a desert with his glasses gone and is afraid to open his eyes. He wanders alone as the day turns to night and opens his eyes for once to see his surroundings. This is the second time Scott's point of view when he performs an optical blast is shown in the series. However, the blast alerts the coyotes who go after him. Thankfully, some oil rig workers in Mexico also observed Cyclops' energy rays from a distance and rescued Scott from the coyotes in time. At the same time, Jean struggles with a nightmare where she can see and sense Scott's predicament, but Charles assures her that it's only a bad dream. But when Jean calls Alex the following day, they become aware of the truth and head out in the Blackbird to rescue Scott. This is a very Scott-centric episode and highlights his natural heroism. This is something that has been relatively absent in the first 3 movies. It also builds upon the psychic connection between Scott and Jean, which has stayed on since Jean's power surge in Season 2. Scott is taken to a hospital, but as the Dr. Force opens his eyes, an optic blast blows off the roof. Scott escapes and walks through the street mindlessly. Some muggers soon surround him, and when he shows his powers to scare them off, one of them turns to Mystique. Mystique has been tailing Scott from the desert, and the ensuing fight reaches the basement of a building. Once again, Jean receives telepathic flashes of Scott's POV and closes in on him. In the basement, Scott blasts off the lights and has an upper hand on Mystique, but Mystique tries to attack him by morphing into Jean. However, Mystique falters when she says that Cerebro helped her locate Scott, which gives her away, as Cerebro cannot still pinpoint exact locations. The real Jean Grey also arrives and defeats Mystique, finally proclaiming herself to be Scott's girlfriend. On their way back, Scott and Jean are cuddling on the jet, while Storm, Wolverine, and Xavier look pleased by the development. Extreme measures. Things have started to become more intense as the Morlocks are finally introduced into the series. The odd-looking mutants break into a spear sports factory, damaging all the products and equipment. One of the Morlocks paralyzes a security guard and gets away. The next day, the owner, Guy Spear, appears to be in a fit as he is about to release the POW R8 sports drink in the market. The POW R8, as you can assume, is a spin on the trendy drink Powerade. In Bayville High, Scott and Jean hide from Kitty as they do not want to accompany her while she practices driving. While the rest of the mutants lead almost an everyday life, Spyke is continuously harassed by bullies. At the Institute, Jean and Scott meet Charles trepidly while being completely aware that he will ask them to give Kitty a driving lesson. However, Wolverine volunteers to do the job, assuming Charles is discussing a serious mission involving action. The reason for such apprehension becomes quite apparent when Kitty drives like a maniac, unsettling Wolverine, who I am sure wants revenge on Jean, Scott, and especially Charles. This was a nice break from the monotony of grim storytelling, as Kitty-Logan camaraderie is always delightful to watch. Meanwhile, Evan blows off Auntie Aurora when she tries to show concern. Evan has difficulty retracting the spikes, and the next morning Berserker reminds him about the skating competition sponsored by POW R8. Callisto brushes past Evan at the competition, warning him that the drink is poisonous. Evan performs well, but a jealous contender outs him as a mutant. Wanting to avoid complications, Evan leaves the competition and drinks up a POW R8 soda, which makes him involuntarily throw spikes. This damages the area, but the X-Men contain the situation. Evan runs to the amphitheater where the Morlocks catch up to him. Evan often resembles powers like an armadillo, which was supposed to be his initial name and design. The character was introduced to depict a cool teenager, but it failed miserably, as not only is his persona a very cliched one, but also because it lacked any real sense or growth until now. Evan wakes up in the sewers amidst the Morlocks, who explain how they hide underground for their disfigurations and for being shunned. Caliban senses Berserker in the sewers, following Callisto from the sports arena. It was already shown that Ray knew someone from down the sewers, and it was probably Callisto. But when and how this happened has never been discussed. While the Morlocks try to stop Berserker from calling the X-Men, he still escapes and calls in the crew. The Morlocks arrive at the Spear Factory and break everything, including a tank containing POW R8. The drink overflows and reaches the sewers. Storm, Xavier, and Logan had already examined the drink, marking it unsafe for mutants, and they, along with a few other X-Men, rescued the Morlocks. But before they can talk with Evan, he leaves with the Misfits. Later, the X-Men go into the sewers to find and convince Evan to return. He eventually shows up to Storm and informs that he will stay back until he figures out his powers. In the comics and 1992 animated series, Storm becomes the leader of Morlocks, but recently, she has given up the title. Spike's character now resembles Marrow. The episode ends with Guy Spears declaring his innocence about the drink, but secretly ordering production as the drink's value just got raised. Logan also gets his vengeance by allowing Kitty to drive Charles back home.
Release my powers!
The Toad, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The title is a tribute to the Chronicles of Narnia story, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It begins with the introduction of Mastermind, who is recruited by Magneto. In the comics, Mastermind was a part of Magneto's first Brotherhood. Wanda gets stuck in traffic in Bayville when Pyro sets a bridge on fire. Wanda is on the bridge and she tries to catch Pyro, but he escapes. The fire on the bridge takes the shape of 4 horses, which could be used as a premonition for the apocalypse and his 4 horsemen-centered story later in the series. Scott, Jean, and Storm notice the fire and come to the rescue to help Wanda. They inform her that Pietro is back in the Brotherhood. Pietro is bossing around everyone at the Brotherhood house, making life quite a hell for the other boys. But when Wanda arrives, he hides in a closet. Toad gives him away, and Wanda inquires with Pietro about Magneto. Pietro cannot answer this, as Magneto only contacts him when needed. I must say that Magneto's worst trait is not his human hatred, but poor parenting. But I am also quite tired of Pietro's Draco Malfoy-like behavior, especially his over-reliance on Daddy Dearest. Wanda had also picked up a locket that Pyro dropped on the bridge. She shows it to Pietro, who suggests it might be a ski lift ticket, and Toad notices it's from Maud Arrows. Toad continues to harass Wanda for attention, who is simply disgusted by him and wishes he were somebody else. Meanwhile, Kurt meets Amanda's parents at her house, but his image inducer glitches, forcing him to teleport occasionally. Toad breaks into Amanda's house to snatch Kurt's image inducer. As Kurt and Todd struggle with the image inducer, they wreck Amanda Sefton's house. Toad finally grabs the image inducer and escapes, exposing Kurt in his natural form. Toad takes up different images of boys to accompany Wanda in the snowy mountains, but stupidly reveals his identity every time. Wanda notices Pyro and closely follows him just when Toad takes the image of a handsome guy to impress Wanda. Wanda finds Pyro disappearing into a giant metallic sphere, which she deduces as Magneto's lair. However, she is soon made unconscious by a gas projected by a hovering gizmo. Wanda meets the acolytes and her father in the sphere, who doesn't want her to cause more trouble. He employs Mastermind to manipulate Wanda's traumatic and depressing memories into moments where Magneto is an excellent father to Wanda. At Bayville, Toad approaches Kurt to help him with rescuing Wanda. Although Nightcrawler initially refuses, he finally agrees to help Toad. They break into Magneto's lair and help an unconscious Wanda out. Toad kisses Wanda as a different guy and then changes back to himself. When Wanda is about to appreciate his efforts, he eats a fly and sabotages himself. With Wanda's memories and anger gone, she is no longer looking for Magneto, and Pietro wants this to sustain as he convinces Toad not to reveal any truth to her. The episode finally adds some lyrics to Toad's theme song, which has been played before in other episodes. Kurt and Amanda also make up as she declares that nothing can stop her from seeing him. Self-possessed. The scene opens on Rogue winning a squash game against Scott. Scott tells Rogue that he will be going to the concert with Jean. After Scott leaves, Rogue has flashes of Scott and Jean's memories. Outside, Mystique meets up with Destiny, who warns her that Rogue might not survive long enough to fulfill her destiny of playing a pivotal role in the mutants' future. Mystique and Destiny share a romantic relationship and are even married in the comics, which is never hinted at in this series. Rogue has more flashes, but Kitty pulls her to ride Jean's new SUV to school. school. Kitty and Kurt tease Jean about dating Scott. Rogue has more flashes of memories at school and meets Risty, who lies about being with her parents in England. Rogue explains that it's getting crowded in her head. This episode makes Rogue the fifth and final mutant in the series who loses control of their power. At the concert, Jamie tags along with Kitty in a borrowed tuxedo, and Jean teases Kitty as a payback. Jean and Scott consider if they are dating and have an awkward conversation. Rogue watches their interactions, and Risty notices that Rogue still has a crush on Scott. She urges Rogue to the crowd to divert her attention. However, it backfires. Rogue's sleeves accidentally tear apart, and she constantly bumps into different people, zapping them in the process. Risty and Rogue also touch accidentally, and Risty transforms back into Mystique, while Rogue transforms into Risty and moves. Rogue then transforms into Sabretooth and attacks the musicians performing. The X-Men present in the concert Save the People, and multiple jumps on Rogue. This is the first time Rogue touches a new mutant and absorbs their power. Rogue again changes to Juggernaut and escapes from the auditorium with Mystique following her. Rogue continues to shapeshift into all the people she ever touched and escapes from the police. Mystique confesses that she only lied to be close, as Rogue is Mystique's adopted daughter. Mystique's real intention is debatable, as she never tried to be close to Kurt. But then again, she never really spent time with infant Kurt to develop any bond. I personally like the way Mystique's character is given several complicated layers, making it hard to judge her. Rogue refuses to get into Mystique's memories. She hears Logan's motorbike and transforms into Sabretooth to attack him. However, Logan almost immediately realizes it's Rogue by the scent. The X-Men learn the truth from Wolverine and go after Rogue. However, as Rogue keeps morphing, the X-Men often have to fight themselves or their colleagues. Finally, Logan volunteers to deal with her as he has healing properties, but Charles also connects with Rogue simultaneously and helps her get rid of all the personalities. Later, Rogue can be seen recovering in the Institute infirmary with Logan by her side. This reflects their father-daughter bond in the movies. While Scott and Charles discuss Rogue's future, Mystique and Destiny pull up outside the Institute. Destiny claims that an ancient mutant will rise who will affect Rogue and Mystique's fate. Under lock and key, the series eventually moves into the main storyline when Gambit breaks into Angel's house and steals an ancient relic. Angel chases him, but Gambit hands the relic to Mesmero, who knocks out Angel. Mesmero is then captured by Magneto, who forces him to release his hypnotic hold on Gambit. Magneto and Gambit leave with the relic and Mesmero, while Angel wakes up just in time to see them leaving. Back at the Institute, the X-Kids are playing a game of softball with Beast as their umpire. However, they use their powers to cheat and call it Mutant Ball. Tabitha and Amanda could also be seen in the bleachers. Angel arrives at the Institute and looks for Xavier. He identifies Mesmero and shares the incident with Xavier and the older X-Men, but Bobby eavesdrops on them. The creators use Bobby as a replacement for Evan as he displays similar rebellious and mischievous behavior. Mastermind reads Mesmero and explains to Magneto that the relic is one half of the Spider Stone that, when joined with the other half, would release the door to En Sabah Nur, or Apocalypse. When Mesmero escapes, Magneto plans to visit London to stop him from getting the other half of the stone. Kurt tries to bond with Rogue at the infirmary as they are now siblings. He takes care of Rogue, which looks like she is secretly enjoying. Meanwhile, the X-Jet arrives at the museum with Xavier, Cyclops, Jean, Beast, Angel, and a stowaway Iceman. If you are wondering where Wolverine and Storm are, they are looking for Mystique. This episode features the original X-Men from the comics. In the meantime, Magneto and his acolytes break into the museum, and when Magneto captures Mesmero, the relic falls from his clothes. Magneto pulls at it, but it gets joined to the other half and forms a huge mystic spider in green. Magneto and his team try to stop the spider but fail and come face to face with the X-Men. Xavier tries to speak with Magneto, but he doesn't listen. Xavier finds Mesmero escaping and reads him, which reveals the whole truth and how Mesmero manipulated Magneto and Mastermind. The Acolytes and X-Men take turns stopping the spider, and finally Gambit stops it, allowing Magneto to destroy the stones. The action scene features Pyro making a fire horseman, which is quite similar to the Red Skull. Bobby's use of Ice Spire is again a reference to how he first appears in the first issue of X-Men. Bobby makes quite an impression in this episode, as he not only has his team members back but also works at par with the older mutants. Xavier requests Magneto to stop, but he doesn't listen and destroys the stone. Charles informs him that the spider was a guardian that stopped the apocalypse from rising, and it was all Mesmero's plan to use Magneto to destroy it. On the other side of the world, the second door opens as the spider vanishes. Cruise Control. This is a filler episode that shows the X-Kids vacationing on a cruise headed towards Bahamas while being chaperoned by Storm. The episode was released out of order as the 13th episode, but the events occur sometime after the incident in London involving Mesmero and the Spider. Tabitha has not officially rejoined the X-Men but is back with the gang. But Tabby looks worried as the only person not enjoying the cruise is her closest friend, Amara. Amara feels down and sick for being so far away from the land. Scott and Jean are also spending some time alone, but their almost kiss is interrupted by Kurt and Kitty, who have found a new hobby of teasing the couple. Above the deck, Bobby shows off by creating ice sculptures on ocean water, and he even makes an iceberg in reference to the movie Titanic. But when Bobby trips and falls, Jean comes to his rescue. Magma also tries to melt the looming iceberg but fails to get her power on, and Scott has to break it at the last moment. Scott gives an earful to Bobby for his behavior. Later in the dining room, Bobby warns Jamie to keep his powers in control, but things go astray when Tabitha bombs an annoying and rude passenger's Eggs Benedict. The ensuing chaos results in fire, and Jean uses telekinesis to douse it with a tank of lobsters. The others are also forced to use their powers to control the situation, but the passengers freak out at the discovery of mutants. Their low-profile vacation turned sour after the incident, and when the ship halted, several of them escaped to the nearby island. This episode mentions Brazil as Amara's country of origin. On the island, Scott and Jean find Tabitha, Bobby, and Amara hanging out as Amara has started to feel better on land. They also notice Kurt and Kitty being sneaky. They leave Scott and Jean and head on to a hot spring. But when Amara swims near an underwater fissure, she somehow wakes up the dormant volcano, which causes tremors. The X-Men rescue everyone on the island and are treated as heroes. Later that night, they enjoy a scrumptious meal provided by the Islanders. However, Storm discovered that many of the kids were missing from the cruise. She arrives on the island with a thunderous cloud. Amara shares her worry about waking the volcano, and soon enough the volcano erupts again, with lava flowing directly onto the settlements. The X-Kids and Storm rally to save the people, but Amara follows the lava to get on top of the crater. Storm follows Amara as she turns into magma and dives right into the lava. Magma stops the eruption and exits the volcano, shocking her friends. This is the second episode that focuses on Amara, and the depth of her powers is something to reckon with in this episode. The Islanders rejoice, but the fun is short-lived as Storm calls back the team to the cruise, where they await further reprimanding.
I can't have a family! I can't!
X-23. In another lighthearted yet poignant storyline, we have someone breaking into S.H.I.E.L.D. and collecting all data related to the mutants, but the person seems to have a particular vendetta against Wolverine. Logan holds a strict training session outdoors at the Institute, but it is interrupted when two helicopters from S.H.I.E.L.D. arrive. Rogue is still in the infirmary as she has also been avoiding Wolverine's rigorous sessions. This cartoon has done a fantastic job of building characters both by personality and appearance. A gradual change in physical attributes and some change in fashion could be seen in our young mutants, who are slowly moving towards adulthood. The young ones are glad when Fury takes away Wolverine on urgent business. At the headquarters, Nick Fury introduces Wolverine to Deborah Risman, who claims to be an ex-scientist for Hydra. This is the first time the famed Nemesis community is named in this series, and it is another example of how Marvel forced the expansion of the universe. Deborah calls Wolverine Weapon X, earning his wrath, but quickly corrects herself and informs that Hydra has infused Logan's healing DNA on a young girl who has been named X-23 due to the 23rd attempt of recreating Weapon X. The girl was trained from childhood to be devoid of any emotions and distractions, and was later infused with adamantium just like Logan. Deborah also warns that X-23 has become violent and volatile. X-23 was sent to S.H.I.E.L.D. to spy, but she went rogue. At the Institute, X-23 has already infiltrated the mansion and watches the X-Men lead their regular, happy, carefree life, which makes her both emotional and angry. One by one, she knocks out every resident, starting with Charles. Scott and Ray, aka Berserker, find Charles, and they are joined by Rogue, who has recovered and is finally ready to be back. But their fight against X-23 is short-lived as the girl is able to trump everybody except Wolverine, who has come back and tries to reason with her. The action moments in this episode are well accounted for as viewers find the moves shown by X-23 to be out of the ordinary and most incredible. The character also earned its place in the Marvel Universe both in comics and in a 2017 movie called Logan. Logan finally restrains X-23, who falls against his chest, crying. Scenes of Logan with little rebellious girls have become a common trope in the series, but are also quite endearing. Logan reasons with X-23 that they are now like family and helps her escape from S.H.I.E.L.D. He argues with Fury that X-23 is a child and a victim of a similar experiment, and therefore they should let her be. Reflecting on the same sentiments, Wolverine lets the X-Kids play dodgeball as a part of training.
But Magnus, do not destroy it! I must!
Dark Horizon Part 1 and 2. We have now reached the end of Season 3, and the story starts with someone moving around inside Xavier's Institute. The sound of groans wakes Kitty, who escapes just before the intruder enters her room. She wakes up Scott, but is eventually zapped by Rogue. Kitty's closest friend, Lockheed, makes a cameo as her stuffed toy. In the comics, Lockheed is a small, purple-colored alien dragon, while in this cartoon, it's a green toy. Every mutant wakes up late the next morning, and Rogue looks like she has a nightmare. A quirky montage shows every X-Kid using their abilities to prepare breakfast and prepare for school. As Rogue is about to get inside the school, a limousine pulls up and Rogue gets inside. She looks like someone who is possessed. It's Jean and Scott's last day of school before graduation, with Principal Kelly and Scott being glad they will be out of each other's hair. Like the live-action adaptation, Jean decides to undertake a genetics major in college. The creators undertook such moves to keep the stories of the animation aligned with the movies. Considering there is a great deal of history and alternatives, it has been a tremendous task for the creators to choose which stories to follow up and which to discard. Rogue visits the Brotherhood lair and zaps Wanda and the boys. The scene features Blob and Toad watching Powerpuff Girls on TV, making it the first cartoon crossover in the series. Rogue and Mystique reach a warehouse, and Mystique lets Rogue borrow her powers. Rogue enters inside to collect Magneto and his acolytes' powers. On graduation day, Magneto and his acolytes, alongside the Brotherhood, crash the event, setting the scene into chaos. Magneto explains to Charles how Rogue zapped them. Mesmero has been watching from afar, and he makes Rogue fly into the air and disappear. Charles and Magneto realize that they must work together to avert the crisis. Much to Logan's dismay, he is asked to work alongside Sabretooth to find Rogue. However, they are also joined by Gambit, who attempts to keep the peace. Charles, Magneto, and Hank return to the mansion to research on Apocalypse. Magneto asks them to search under the name Onsaba Nur, while Charles uses Cerebro to analyze his readings of Mesmero, which helped him in finding the Tomb of Apocalypse. Meanwhile, Wolverine and his team get Rogue and Mystique sent in the limo and the control tower as they realize they have left the plane. Magneto suggests that they only take the more experienced mutants to stop Apocalypse's resurrection, and a team consisting of Professor X, Magneto, Beast, Shadowcat, Cyclops, Jean, Storm, Nightcrawler, Iceman, Quicksilver, Pyro, and Colossus arrive at the Great Sphinx in Egypt. From this point onwards, the episode uses ancient Egyptian music to set the tone for the storytelling. Shadowcat goes underground with an oxygen mask and lamp, from where she pulls a lever to open a staircase. The mutants enter through the stairs, but as they look around, several gigantic Egyptian statues come to life, and the door to the stairs closes, trapping them inside. The second part continues with the mutants fighting against the statues in different groups. The sequence shows Kurt, Kitty, and Colossus fighting together, while Kitty and Colossus appreciate each other. This grouping has been done quite intentionally by the writers. As in the comics, the three of them also feature as part of a European team called Excalibur. Magneto saves Charles, whose chair was knocked down. The duo, along with Beast, escapes into another chamber. Various segments of these two episodes highlight the bond shared by Professor X and Magneto despite their opposing philosophies. Their personal connection can also be seen when Charles calls Magneto Magnus. On the other hand, Jean collapses while trying to fend off a statue, and Storms tries to wake her up. Bobby also tries to stop the statues, but he is quite exhausted. Cyclops, Pyro, and Quicksilver also work together to take down some of the statues. Charles sends a telepathic message to the X-Men, while Magneto and Beast find some hieroglyphics. Beast interprets the hieroglyphics and shares the story of Onsaba Nur, who defeated Pharaoh Ramatut and found his power source in a vessel called the Eye of the Ages. Onsaba Nur was an unbeatable warrior, a gray-skinned mutant whose objective was to reshape the world in his own image. They further learned that Onsaba Nur was betrayed by his servants, who locked him in a vessel at the highest summit. Charles realizes that Apocalypse's objective is to change every human to a mutant, but they do not know where his actual tomb is. In the meantime, Wolverine and his team arrive at the Himalayas amidst a blizzard. Charles, Magneto, and the Beast open a closed door to find the base of the Eye of the Ages, where they find a Cerebro-like machine. The other mutants also discover that the statues are actually mechanical robots. Wolverine notifies Charles that they are in Tibet and sends the location of Makalu Peak. Just then, Mesmero launches a psychic attack, but Charles' mental block saves them. It's a nice change to see Sabretooth and Wolverine arguing like exes and annoying the hell out of Gambit. Mesmero arrives at the tomb with Mystique and Rogue. He asks Mystique to open the third gate, and this time she shapeshifts into a King Cobra to do what is needed. However, she gets turned to stone when the gates open. Despite the various shades in her character, Mystique's villainy becomes a tad monotonous as the woman lacks any firmer ground for all her actions. Her loyalty is always up for debate, and her plans always backfire on her. Rogue gets inside and opens the main vessel. Apocalypse wakes up and touches Rogue to absorb the powers of all the mutants she touched. Wolverine arrives in time but is thrown away by Apocalypse. In Egypt, the mutants are finally able to regroup, and everyone goes aboard the vessel. The vessel gets teleported to the Himalayas with Charles on the cerebral interface. They come out of the vessel and try to stop Apocalypse. Apocalypse uses a pulse wave to defeat every mutant and leaves with the vessel. The episode ends as Magneto laments at being defeated while Charles claims it's only the beginning of their greatest battle. Season 4, Impact. The scene opens on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, where Apocalypse's vessel appears on top of a Mayan pyramid. Apocalypse appears above the pyramid and builds an energy dome around the area. It's been 2 weeks since the events of the Dark Horizon, and while Magneto and his acolytes question the locals about the apocalypse, Xavier and Beast are undertaking their own research in the mansion. The new mutants are enjoying their time, but Rogue looks messed up. Logan tries to cheer her up, but she is still distraught. Rogue is upset that Mystique's petrified body is brought to the mansion by Xavier. Logan informs that Xavier has not been able to connect to Mystique, so he has delivered the statue to the Brotherhood. At the Brotherhood, Toad, Blob, and Quicksilver joke around with Stone Mystique, which is quite degrading and abusive. Wanda tries to stop them, while Lance appears disinterested. Archaeologists discovered Apocalypse's dome in Mexico, and the news became public. Meanwhile, Kurt is outraged that Xavier has delivered Stone Mystique to the Brotherhood. He tries to convince Rogue to help their mother, but when she ignores him, he goes to the Brotherhood house to get Mystique back. Magneto gets furious with the lack of information in Egypt and even threatens Colossus. The interaction revealed that Magneto has Colossus's family as a hostage, forcing him to become an acolyte. Gambit again becomes the peacemaker, stating Magneto is their only hope against Apocalypse. At the mansion, Rogue catches Kurt talking to Stone Mystique and yells at him. Kurt delivers a moving dialogue about letting go of hatred and anger. Although this doesn't affect Rogue, Kurt notices a single tear falling from the statue. He brings up the statue to Xavier, but again, nothing works. Jean delivers the news of Apocalypse's dome to Xavier and Beast, who prepare a team of only the original X-Men for a fact-finding mission. Kurt is, however, missing as he is more concerned about Mystique. Kurt's obsession is quite annoying as Mystique has never acted as his mother and showed the slightest bit of care. Magneto also receives the news about the dome and leaves without his acolytes as he feels that only he or Apocalypse will survive their fight. At the site, all the equipment set by the X-Men gets blocked and destroyed by the dome. They notice Magneto arrive in his metallic sphere. Magneto draws all the tanks and satellites and throws them against the dome, but everything gets destroyed. Finally, Apocalypse appears above the dome and projects energy toward Magneto, trapping him in a blast. It's unclear whether Magneto survives as the X-Men stare in shock. Back at the mansion, Kurt has invited Agatha Harkness to help Mystique, but she states that only Rogue can help Mystique. Rogue is unwilling to do so, and Kurt tries his best to convince her. But in a fit of anger, Rogue throws Stone Mystique from the cliff, which falls and breaks apart. Kurt teleports to the beach beside the fallen pieces and breaks down, while Rogue cries from above the cliff but turns back. No good deed. Things have really changed since the emergence of Apocalypse. Magneto is presumed dead, but only Wanda is upset about it. Pietro tries to explain that Magneto was not the ideal father, but Wanda doesn't want to hear it. Mastermind's manipulation of her memories has also turned Wanda against the X-Men. Her frustration leads to an accidental power use, which derails a subway train the Brotherhood has been riding. Lance notices that the train is about to blast and warns his friends. Blob runs through the doors, breaking them and allowing the other passengers to escape. Lance has been shown to keep a low profile for the last season. The guy appears to oscillate between good and evil, which perhaps puts him through an internal struggle. Lance warns the other passengers to get out, while he also stops to help an older woman who has fallen off a wheelchair. When Toad tries to nick a fallen wallet, a man hangs on to him to save his life, and Toad unwillingly gets the man out. As the Brotherhood emerges from the subway, they are deemed as heroes by the people and the media, which puts off Scott and Kitty. Meanwhile, Principal Kelly is now running for the position of mayor with his anti-mutant agenda, calling for the registration of all mutants. Principal Kelly's character is similar to Senator Kelly's from the comics and the live-action versions. Despite being saved by the X-Men multiple times, he continues with his hate and anti-mutant rants. The Brotherhood's recent heroism further affects his political campaign. The lady, Lance had saved, awarded the Brotherhood a $10,000 check and renovated their home. This inspires the Brotherhood to make a profit out of saving people. Although Lance is hesitant at first, Pietro convinces him, and the Brotherhood orchestrates various fake accidents so that they can save people and be a hero. The X-Men get weary of the Brotherhood, and Xavier quickly finds out about their little scam. When the Brotherhood corners Kelly for his campaign, the X-Men appears to confront them. Pietro is wise enough to understand that they are largely outnumbered, and the Brotherhood retreats. As it turns out, Pietro is the baddest of them all, as he is utterly devoid of conscience. He manipulates Wanda against the X-Men, which leads to an incident during a zoo opening. Wanda controls the X-Men's powers, which makes it appear that the X-Men are responsible for the accidents in the zoo. The X-Men get imprisoned, and Xavier asks them to stay put, although it's easy for Kitty to phase through the bars or for Kurt to teleport. The Brotherhood also realizes that their 5 minutes to fame is over and plans a big event before they retire. As planned, Pietro damages the controls of a bullet train, but they learn that another train containing gasoline tankers is now on its collision course. While the rest of the Brotherhood escapes, Lance stays behind. The authorities release the X-Men to save the day, and while Kurt and Scott sever the engine from the carriage, Jean stops it. Kitty stays back to phase the engine through the other train. However, Kitty gets spent halfway through and the collision results in a blast. Jean tries to contain the blast, and Lance also comes to her help, being the only redeemable character of the lot. Later, an investigation into the Brotherhood leads to their new things being taken away.
No, kid, don't!
Target X. There is no X-Men without Weapon X, Logan, and this time Wolverine's story begins at a cafe at Bayville where Ray, Bobby, and Jamie are trying to convince Wolverine to take their training session. This shocking turn of events was caused by Jean and Scott's upgrade as instructors who have turned the training sessions into science classes. Wolverine disappoints the boys and leaves the cafe, but picks up a scent and follows it. He gets abducted by a pair of tentacles. Wolverine wakes up in a transport plane and tries to escape. He falls from the aircraft to a forest, incurring a series of bumps and scratches. Gauntlet and Omega Red also drop off the plane in search of Wolverine and target him. It appears Omega Red has a personal grudge against Wolverine. Omega Red pulls an actual Wolverine out of the bush during the chase sequence. Logan is, however, saved by X-23, who is the real target of the bad guys. X-23 explains that she is targeted by Hydra, and they have used Wolverine as a pawn to find her. X-23 is as rebellious and violent as before and refuses to listen and talk to Logan properly. Soon enough, she leads them into a trap set by Gauntlet and Omega Red. Back at the Institute, Scott and Jean are having difficulty keeping a check on the new mutants who refuse to learn how science can be used in their actions. Back to our main story. Gauntlet uses his sonic weapon to incapacitate X-23 and Logan. The aircraft lands at a Hydra headquarters where Viper, aka Madam Hydra, comes to visit Wolverine. She fills in about how X-23 has been destroying every Hydra base, and now they will wipe her memory and rebellious nature to make her the ultimate weapon. After Viper leaves, Omega Red attacks Wolverine, cursing out all the Weapon X members like Sabretooth, Maverick, and Wraith. The episode also mentions Wade Wilson or Deadpool as a member of the Weapon X program. Omega Red's attack helps Wolverine get free, who thwarts the Russian villain to find X-23. It turns out X-23 has only been pretending to be unconscious, and she quickly takes control and encounters Wolverine on her way. The limitations imposed on showing Wolverine were overcome with X-23, as she is not only a kid, hence representing the target audience, but also has these cool moves and blades protruding from her feet. X-23 shares her plan to blow up the place, and just then, an alarm rings. Madam Hydra tries to leave on the aircraft, but X-23 gets on it. Wolverine follows her, but X-23 pushes him back. Inside the aircraft, X-23 throws explosives in front of Madam Hydra and Gauntlet, while Logan watches the aircraft go up in flames from afar. S.H.I.E.L.D. arrives and captures Omega Red, who smirks mysteriously. This may mean Omega Red has his own plans. Logan tells Nick Fury that X-23 has died, but smiles when he picks up her scent. X-23 is shown watching from afar as Wolverine flies away. Back at the Institute, Scott and Jean show cool tricks they can do by utilizing science as Wolverine walks by with a smile. The moral of the story: experience trumps skill.
David.
Sins of the Sun. This segment has brought the story to some unfamiliar territory as a new character is introduced into the plot. The story begins in Scotland, where a blonde guy called Lucas enters the party of a group of punk teenagers at the ruins of McFadden Castle. A girl looking exactly like Risty is shown, but the purpose of using her is never clarified. Lucas has Xavier-like powers and descends into the dungeons and asks someone named David to call Xavier. David calls up Xavier and addresses him as a father. He then asks for help. On their way to Scotland, Xavier argues with his ex-wife, Gabrielle Haller, while Scott and Jean share their surprise. Storm asks them to check up on Kurt and Kitty, who are suffering from the flu. It's extremely heartwarming to see the Beast take care of the new mutants as they leave for school and check up on Kurt and Kitty. If Xavier is the father of the institution, Hank McCoy is definitely the mother figure. The flu causes Kurt to teleport whenever he sneezes. On their ride, Xavier explains that his ex-wife Gabrielle never told him about David, and now he is kidnapped. Upon reaching Gabrielle's house, Xavier admonishes her for keeping the secret, while Gabrielle claims that she lied to protect David, as Xavier would have barely given any time. Lucas spies on them and sees Jean from outside. Jean notices a little boy in the hall, and Gabrielle explains that he is Ian, a boy David rescued from the street. Ian doesn't speak, and Jean goes after him, but she is soon captured by Lucas. At the Institute, Kitty goes to Kurt to get more tissues, but he sneezes in his sleep and teleports to Bayville High, manifesting Kitty's worst dream of being in school in her pajamas. Kurt continues to teleport along with Kitty, which is disastrous for her. Jean wakes up at McFadden's castle and tries to escape, but Lucas is too strong for her. Scott goes to the castle on a bike to find Jean. Jean finds Scott in the castle and tries to warn him, but he tries to defeat Lucas. Lucas knocks out Scott and ties him to a wall. Storm, Gabrielle, and Xavier find Ian, who leads them to the castle but uses pyrokinesis to reveal his loyalty to Lucas. Jean is again locked in the dungeon, and while breaking the walls, she finds David. When Xavier comes to the castle, he rescues Scott, while Jean and David also appear. Xavier and David are about to reconcile when he changes to Ian and then to Lucas. It is revealed that David is a mutant who has multiple personality disorder, which helps him to change into a different person with different abilities. In popular media, David Haller is known as Legion and has 1,000 different alters. David asks Charles to escape, but Charles connects with him telepathically. Charles creates telepathic bubbles in David's mind to remove Lucas and Ian, but he accidentally grabs Lucas's hand. Lucas reveals it was all his plan to lock away the other two personalities so that he could be free. Charles and the X-Men return to base dejectedly. This is one of the stories that never gets resolved due to the series ending in Season 4. On the other hand, Kurt finally teleports back to the mansion and wakes up, but he gets hit by a disheveled and furious Kitty. Uprising. After a disappointing story that goes nowhere, we are now ushered into a tense environment where public hysteria about the mutants is on the rise. News of Apocalypse erecting another dome in the Shanxi province of China has become public. A little boy called Dorian Leach with greenish skin and warts watches the news, but his mother prohibits him from seeing any mutant-related report. The news covers interviews with Duncan Matthews, who is now a mutant hater and works in a mining camp. Lucid, one of the Morlocks, gets attacked by rowdy teenagers when he tries to secure some food from a dumpster. Spyke comes to his rescue, and he has now developed bony armor and can fire up his sticks due to evolved mutation. Later, Callisto warns Evan not to engage with outsiders, but he wants to protect and safeguard the Morlocks. At the Institute, Beast and Xavier research on the domes and watch the military's failed attempt to penetrate the dome. Sam and Amara get attacked by Duncan and his cronies, but Spyke arrives to save them and damages Duncan's care. Sam and Amara report the issue to Xavier, who stops Storm from intervening and sends Wolverine to talk to Evan. On the other hand, Nick Fury releases Trask to reinstate the Sentinel program to fight Apocalypse and the rising mutant threat. While Wolverine explains the tense situation and its implications to Spyke, it doesn't deter him. Spyke goes to a store to buy some groceries, but the owner refuses to serve him. Dorian and his mother are also in the shop, and all the customers turn against Spike and even try to throw away Dorian. The scene is quite blood-boiling. This has got to be one of the best episodes and one of my favorites, especially with its focus on mass hysteria and hate crimes. Spike saves the boy and leaves the store after paying for the groceries. Duncan gears up for retribution with high-tech mining lasers while the mob protests outside the Institute and the Brotherhood house. Duncan and his team throw grenades through the maintenance holes to force the Morlocks into coming outside. On the other hand, Dorian tries to discuss the possibility of him being a mutant with his mother, but she refuses to listen to it. Dorian escapes, looking for Spike. However, Spike and the Morlocks are also aided by the X-Men, who have almost defeated Duncan's team. Spike's story in the series fulfills Stan Lee's stance that great power comes with great personal costs. The transition in his character and the depth of it after he joins the Morlocks is one of the very best in this cartoon. When Dorian walks in between Duncan and Spike, Spike jumps before him. Dorian freaks out at the firing and screams, which results in a sudden power outage, including that of the mutants. This brings Spike back to his earlier self, and Cyclops can remove his visor. Spike apologizes to Dorian's mom, who blames him for outing her son as a mutant. As they leave, the power comes back on for both the mutants and the street. Duncan and his group get arrested while Xavier offers Mrs. Leach his card.
That one could control the weather?
Meet my family.
Cajun Spice. After throwing Mystique from a cliff, Rogue has been absent from the action so far. This changes as we see Rogue in a therapy session with Professor X while she is grappling with the Mystique incident. On her way to school, she bumps into Kurt, who is still upset with her but looks down when Rogue confesses that she might leave the Institute. However, Rogue gets abducted by Gambit and wakes up on a moving train heading for New Orleans, Louisiana. Kurt looks for Professor X in the mansion and tells Logan that Rogue is missing. Logan follows Rogue's scent and gets a whiff of Gambit. He visits the Acolyte's base where Pyro is rewatching the tape of Apocalypse supposedly killing Magneto. Pyro's enjoyment of the scene speaks volumes about his character and dislike for Magneto. Wolverine beats Pyro in a fight, but the Acolyte is of no help, although he informs him that Colossus is back in Russia. It's also absolutely hilarious when Pyro comments that Sabretooth is playing with a ball of yarn, as this is not the first time Sabretooth is referred to as a cat. Gambit argues with Rogue that he wants to help her get free and away from the X-Men. When he unties Rogue, she tries to get rid of him, but decides otherwise. They arrived in New Orleans amidst Mardi Gras celebrations, which probably took place on the 4th of March since the event took place on the same date in 2003. Gambit takes Rogue to a jazz club where they run into some of his old rivals. During the fight, Rogue touches a person called Julian and learns that Gambit is a Thieves Guild member and that his father is kidnapped by a rival gang called the Rippers. Gambit had purposefully abducted Rogue to rescue his father, but pretended in front of Rogue. An X-Men team consisting of Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, and Storm has also arrived in New Orleans to search for Rogue after Charles found her through Cerebro. Gambit hides Rogue from the team, and the two take a boat to visit the Rippers' base at Blood Moon Bayou. During their ride, Rogue and Gambit discuss their personal issues with being used by their parents. They are soon spotted by the Rippers but manage to evade the attacks. While sneaking into the house, Rogue accidentally touches Gambit and learns how he used her. She leaves Gambit alone, who finally breaks in and saves his father. Gambit's father turns out to be equally bad as the Rippers and wants to conduct a heist. Gambit ignores him, but they are caught by guards. Rogue comes to their rescue, and soon the X-Men join in. As Gambit's father is amazed by the mutant powers, Rogue introduces the X-Men as her family. During the fight, Rogue falls into the water, and her eyeshadowless face can be seen for the first time. Rogue prevents Wolverine from slicing up Gambit and decides to go back with the X-Men. Gambit realizes she is with people who care for her and gives her a Queen of Hearts card for the second time. Kurt is also concerned about Rogue and glad she is back. Ghost of a Chance. Now, this is a story that could be a great horror-centric ploy to elevate the X-Men characters. However, it is only reduced to a standalone storyline as we see several X-Men members are riding dirt bikes in the cannons until the formation of a new reservoir. They are supervised by Logan, who takes Sam, aka Cannonball, for a friendly race together. Kitty can't keep up with Rogue and takes a different route, but boulders fall upon her. Kitty tries to get on a ledge, which breaks off, and a girl named Danielle saves her. Danielle Moonstar is a Native American teenager who claims claims to be from Dark Hollow and lives with her grandfather. She shares excitement in finding a mutant just like her. Logan spots the smoke from afar and looks for the accident. They find Kitty along with Danielle and take them back to the mansion. At the Institute, Sam traps Logan for a rematch while Charles introduces Danielle to everyone. Charles informs Logan that Danielle is a telepath, but she has a troubled mind, which could be dangerous. This proves true when, during a training session with the new mutants, Danielle attacks Shadowcat, Nightcrawler, and Jean with their worst fears. In the comics, Danielle is named Psyche or Mirage and becomes a part of the new mutants. Charles comes to the training area and clears everyone's thoughts. Danielle gets scared of being sent back and gets angry. Kitty and Danielle are shown sharing the same room, which means Rogue must have moved to another. Danielle looks troubled as she has a nightmare affecting Charles and Storm. Charles wakes Kitty up and inquires her about Danielle, but Kitty goes defensive. The next morning, Kitty finds Danielle's bed and belongings missing and blames Charles and the rest for driving her away. However, to her amazement, Charles informs her that Danielle doesn't exist and that Kitty has been sleeping since the day of her bike accident. Kitty has difficulty believing it and hears Danielle's voice asking for help. Kitty calls for Danielle's grandfather, the Black Eagle. In the comics, Black Eagle is one of Xavier's old friends. In her dreams, Kitty sees the mansion as damp, green, and dripping with water. She sees a ghostly image of Danielle asking for help. Kitty forces Kurt to take her to a nearby spot so she can find her. They teleport to Dark Hollow and find Danielle's grandfather at Maggie Blue Road, who tells them that Danielle has been missing for 2 years as the village people were after her. The address is a reference to Maggie Blue O'Hara, who voices Kitty. Kitty returns to where she had been injured and dives underwater. She phases through the bottom and finally finds an unconscious Danielle, who is radiating a blue light. Meanwhile, Sam and Wolverine are in a race, but Sam loses when he shows off his powers. Kurt teleports to them and asks for help in finding Kitty. Upon arriving at the reservoir, the new mutants dig a hole and Kurt teleports and rescues Kitty and Danielle. Danielle recovers in the infirmary and has developed a psychic bond with Kitty. Charles explains to Logan that her mutant powers kept Danielle alive for 2 years, and she has used powers of projection to get help from Kitty. Ascension Part 1. Unlike the previous 3 seasons, the 2-part story for the series finales was released in separate episodes. The penultimate episode shows Apocalypse at his final stretch of plans. He lifts a pyramid from below the Sphinx in Egypt and summons another dome. Mesmero reads the news and rejoices, but he is apprehended by Wolverine and Jean. At the Institute, Xavier questions Mesmero about Apocalypse's plans. After much coercion, Mesmero confesses that Apocalypse seeks to activate the dormant X gene in humans to make almost everyone a mutant, as not everybody will survive the process. Xavier further reads Mesmero's mind to learn how Apocalypse will use the domes. As Xavier and Storm are about to leave for Egypt, Jean tries to stop them, but Xavier assures her that she is needed in the Institute. Ansaba Nur gathers more power from several panels inside the Sphinx, while the Blackbird reaches the destination. Storm refuses to go without the professor and waits inside while Xavier puts on a smaller version of the Cerebro helmet to speak to Apocalypse. Beast and the students see the relay in the mansion. To their horror, a much stronger-looking Apocalypse emerges. Xavier confronts Apocalypse and asks him to stop, as it will ruin humanity. But Apocalypse is on a power trip and considers himself a messiah sent by destiny to uplift humankind. Apocalypse tries to attack Xavier, and Storms intervenes. The students watch in horror as light beams engulf Professor and Storm, seemingly killing them. Jean breaks down while Nick Fury arrives in a Shy-LD helicopter and meets Logan. Inside the control room, he asks Beast to pull up images from the domes where he has sent the Sentinels to attack the dome or Apocalypse. Logan is infuriated by watching the Sentinels, but Fury claims he had no choice. Fury plans to distract Apocalypse with some Sentinels, while others will destroy the dome, but Apocalypse is alerted and awakens his 4 horsemen. Everyone is shocked to see a modified version of Magneto, Mystique, Storm, and Xavier emerge as the 4 horsemen, which indicates that Apocalypse didn't kill them. Professor X could be seen walking and wielding a psionic scythe, which might be a reference to Psylocke. But then again, Apocalypse creates 4 mystical horses to carry the 4 horsemen to the different pyramids. Although not explicitly stated, it could be understood that the 4 horsemen are quite biblical, as Xavier, with his scythe, represents death, Magneto is war, Storm is famine, and Mystique is pestilence. I must say, Professor X looks the coolest and most formidable with his torn black garments and black eye mask. Logan takes leadership of the situation and assigns teams. Kitty goes to the Brotherhood, who refuses to join, except for Wanda. As the Four Horsemen defends the domes against Sentinels, the episode ends with 4 teams arriving for the final battle. In Egypt, Xavier faces Jean, Boom Boom, Magma, Multiple Man, and Colossus. Mystique is guarding the Sphinx as Wolverine, Cyclops, and Nightcrawler arrive. In China, Storm has to face Beast, Spike, Berserker, and Iceman, whereas in Mexico, Magneto faces Shadowcat, Scarlet Witch, Angel, Havoc, and Sunspot.
Mother, please, don't.
Ascension Part 2. The series finale starts with respective teams encountering their most formidable foes. Logan has quite strategically formed the teams. Jean appeals to Xavier, but he is entirely under the control of Apocalypse. In China, Spike tries to do the same with his aunt Aurora, but to no avail. In Mexico, Wanda tries to communicate with her father and is quite dumbfounded by his attacks. Kitty saves Wanda and implores that Magneto is not her father right now. Meanwhile, at the Sphinx, the group infiltrates through a tunnel, but Mystique puts up an intense fight as her enhanced powers now allow her to transform into multiple animals and even a puddle of liquid. Interestingly, the mutants use the highest level of their powers in battling Apocalypse's horsemen. Magneto reassembles a Sentinel, which now looks like a zombified version that attacks Kitty's team. When Kitty is hurt, Wanda finally comes out of her trance and hexes her father, which dismantles the Sentinel, but Magneto breaks out of the magical grasp. Meanwhile, Apocalypse lies inside the Eye of Ages and gets on with his plan. The top of each pyramid starts ascending to the sky. The levitated portions further break into smaller pieces to form a cage-like structure around Earth. Nick Fury sends the last Sentinels to break the chain. Beast orders the teams to attack the ground bases. When Xavier defeats everybody on Jean's team, she heads out wearing the smaller version of Cerebro to even out the odds. In a magnificent moment, the projections of Xavier and Jean fight each other, and Jean uses a shield in the projection, which makes her look like a phoenix. She is able to overthrow Xavier but collapses, enabling Xavier to get back up. Logan's team is also taken out as Mystique shows off one of the most remarkable transformations where she changes from a bunch of snakes to a Black Panther. As a portion of Apocalypse's pyramids in space goes offline, he calls Magneto for help. Magneto destroys the Sentinels, and coming back to Earth, he attacks Wanda. This time, she is saved by her brother Pietro, who has come with the Brotherhood. Lance also gets worried seeing an unconscious Kitty and runs beside her. The Brotherhood fights against Magneto while Apocalypse turns on the pyramids to finally get on with his plan. The teams start failing, but as a last bit of surprise, Nick Fury arrives with Rogue, Cannonball, Mrs. Leech, and Dorian. Rogue borrows Dorian's power, and Cannonball takes her to the base. Rogue shuts off the powers to Apocalypse mechanization, which deactivates his hold on the Four Horsemen. As Rogue and Wolverine lock Apocalypse inside the Eye of Ages, Rogue brings the power back on, sending Apocalypse to some other time dimension. Everyone reunites with their loved ones, and it's most endearing to see Magneto with his children while Kitty and Lance have probably patched up. Kurt and Rogue refuse to forgive Mystique, the best decision so far. Later, Xavier shares his vision of the future, which he saw when Apocalypse controlled him. The vision showed mutant persecution continuing, but Magneto has reformed and trained kids at the Institute. A vision of Jean turning into the Phoenix and against her friends would have been the plot for Season 5 if it had continued. Adult versions of the X-Men and Brotherhood are also shown. The Brotherhood and Pyro have joined Shai-Eld, while Nimrod leads the Sentinels. The only 3 people missing from this vision are Wolverine, Sabretooth, and Mystique. The episode ends with a group shot of the newly formed X-Men, which now also consists of X-23, Spyke, Colossus, and Gambit. As per the show's writers, Season 5 would have introduced new characters like Emma Frost and Psylocke, but its cancellation after Season 4 left several storylines unfinished and unaccounted for. Considering that this version has been a slow burner for character development, more interactions between characters before they turned adult would have been reasonable. Do you think the series finished properly? What else would you have liked to see? Do let us know in the comments below.